Brian Keane. Welcome to the podcast.
Dan, thanks very much for having me on.
Thanks for coming up on you made it through the storm anyway.
Just about. I actually came up last night to keep it safe because I toyed with it. Like, it was one of those things that what's the one decision that eliminates a million decisions? And I was like, how will I get up? What time will I leave? How will I train? How will I work around this? I was like, I'll just go up the night before. So I literally stayed in a hotel last night just to make sure that I got here today for this conversation, and then one that I'm doing myself on my podcast after.
Happy days. Well, look, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Been looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to dive straight in with this, right, because we have lots to cover today. You are a man who is 520 episodes deep into your own podcast, which is fantastic. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
I am fascinated with the human condition. I'm not going to tell you what that means to me. I'm going to let you tell you what that means to you. One of the reasons we discussed this just before we started recording here that I do my podcast is to learn more about myself, about human beings, about what makes us tick, about what motivates us, and strategies for trying to learn and implement the new behaviors to help me get to these magical places of self-awareness and performance and things like that. My first question for you, which is going to lead us off on a wild tangent, I know this already, but my first question for you is, in 520 episodes, and you can include your own personal work with people as well, because you've worked with thousands of people, what have you learned about the human condition?
It's a great question to start us off as well, because the podcast has completely changed who I am as a person, because you're having conversations with very high performers, high-level individuals, people who are achieving great things. And I've had everyone from professional athletes to New York Times bestselling authors to influencers with tens of millions of followers and everything in between. And it's very difficult to have those conversations and not be impacted by them in a positive and a negative way, or in a more self-aware way. And for me, what I started to realize, Dan, was very interesting about the human condition was, and this is going to sound, it probably sounds cliche, and you probably already know this, and so will a lot of the listeners, is that everyone's going through their own shit, and that we're all human at the end of the day, struggling with things and being really good at other things. When I started the podcast in particular, because I did the first 50 episodes by myself, I built up a bit of an audience, and then I started reaching out to guests. That was my strategy. It was my tactics from day one, that, look, I've got X amount of followers, I've got X amount of downloads. Do you want to come on and have a conversation? And I was using that as a pitch. It's why I was able to bring on decent sized guests from the get-go. And when I started having those conversations with people, it got me questioning a lot of my own beloved beliefs, for the lack of a better expression, things that I thought were quote unquote right, things that I thought were facts or truthful when it came to nutrition, fitness, training, mindset, personal development, business. They started to question a lot of that. And I used to put people on pedestals. I would think that I would look at someone I was following on social media or people I listened to on a podcast, and I'd have them on this big pedestal going, wow, they have it all figured out. And what I started to learn as I met more of these people, some in real life, some online, some at events, combinations, was that nobody has everything figured out. That most people, there's an element of they're brilliant at this one thing, but they're struggling in other areas. Like, I would talk to fitness influencers who were fucking jacked, like, and just in the best physical condition you could ever see, but their relationship was completely in turmoil, or they couldn't get their business off the ground. I remember I used to compete in bodybuilding shows. And I was a professional fitness model for years. I was one of those ab selfie wankers.
Were you actually a professional fitness model?
I was a professional fitness model for 2.5 years. Yes. So magazines, photo shoots, competitions. Like I have a pro card as a fitness model, so I'm able to compete as a professional fitness model in competitions, which is the shittiest brag of all time. Like, basically,
you get a little card for that?
You get a little card, like a little fucking poodle show. It's like, oh, you're pretty. Turn around there, Brian. But so I would get paid for competitions when you did well, and then photo shoots, things along those lines. So I did that for 2 years. But one of the things that I learned, which was very eye-opening for me, was right before I started the podcast. It was in 2015. I was doing the WBFF World in Vegas, and I was chatting to a guy I'd been following on social media for probably 2 years. He had over 1 million followers on Instagram in 2015, which was massive. That's the equivalent of probably 20 or 30 million now in terms of the reach. And I looked up to this guy and I was like, oh my God, he's in incredible shape. He's all these followers. And I remember sitting down, we were getting spray tanned. Of course we were. Getting fucking spray tanned. Fucking, there's such a...
This is a unique story.
Yeah. So literally I was getting spray tanned before the competition. So the competition was a big, massive one. It was in the Cosmopolitan in Las Vegas. It was on TV, etc. So it was a big show. So we were sitting backstage, about to get spray tanned. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to talk to him. I was like, I've been following this guy for years. I'm a massive fan. I'm going to talk to him. And I was chatting to him, and he was really sound, really nice. And then he started telling me about that he was still living at home and he couldn't figure out the business side. And he was like, I've put all my money into this. He goes like, I'm hoping the show goes really well. I flew over here, cost me a couple of $1,000 to stay in the hotel. And he's like, I hope I do well in the show. He goes, I'm really struggling financially. And I sat there going, like, I was doing really well in business at this point. This was 2015. And I remember looking going, oh my God, all you see is not all there is. Because I had this story made up in my head that this guy was in great shape, loads of followers, loads of money, really successful. And he was really struggling in this area. He didn't understand how to monetize his audience. He didn't understand how to work as an online coach. He didn't understand any of these things. Really nice guy, but had this massive gap in his knowledge. And it was a bit of a wake-up call for me that, okay, this social media thing, even in 2015, is an illusion. It looks like this guy has it all figured out, and he clearly doesn't. That's okay. But it made me question going, right, I need to stop putting people on pedestals. And then as I started the podcast, which was early or late 2016, a year later, I started to see that trend coming up, that people, and success leaves clues. Some of the people that I love speaking with are the people who have the balance. You know this, you've got 3 kids, you play GEA, you've got the podcast of business. I'm all about balance and harmony. Like, I love having a successful business that I would do for free, keeping on top of my fitness, spending time with my daughter, being able to go away like this weekend with my partner, being able to spend time with my family. I love having that balance across the board. That's what's important to me. So when I talk to guests on podcasts, I'm looking for that. I used to look for the extreme, the person that was amazing, that was making millions in business, or the person that was just completely shredded, or the most incredible endurance athlete ever. But then as I grew as a person and started to get more self-aware of what was important to me, you ended up gravitating more towards people who had this balance. So that is something that I kind of got forced into seeing and putting the mirror back on me on, okay, what do I actually want? What's important for me? What does happiness look like for me, for lack of a better cliche? Like, what does harmony look like for me in balance? And the podcast makes me regularly question that, because somebody will say something and I'll go, fuck, I've been out of alignment here, or I've been going off path here, and it just pulls me back a small bit. And then again, recalibrate, go forward again, and then that happens regularly. So we said right before we went on air, and this is true now, I have a massive podcast. I'm very fortunate. One of the top 0.5% podcasts in the world, more down to consistency of releasing one every single Monday, regardless, rain, snow, storm, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter. If it's Monday, the podcast comes out. So we've been able to grow basically by just sticking in there and longevity. Now, I've had great guests, been very lucky with that as well. But because of that, even if there wasn't people listening, I would keep it, because it constantly makes me reevaluate what's important to me. It makes me question things that I thought were true. Like, I had Jay Alderton on the podcast, who's coming out on this Monday coming. So the episode will probably be out by the time this goes live. And I had Jay on back in episode 73, and it was a good podcast. It was just a back and forth. And he said a couple of things about like saying yes to things, saying no to things. He was using Mark Mason as an example, the author of The Subtle Art of Giving a Fuck. He helped Will Smith write his book about when you go into a restaurant in New York where they will just keep bringing you food, and you get a plate or you get a card and it's green and red. And if you turn it green, they just keep bringing you the next serving or the next dish. And then when you put it as red, they stop and they break. That's the whole thing for the restaurant. And Mark Mason was saying, and Jay quoted him, life is like that. There's times when it should be green and you say yes to everything. And there's times when you need to turn it no, and it should be red, where everything becomes a no and you focus on higher priority tasks. Right now, I'm starting to shift into a season of no. I'm saying no to a lot of things because I said a lot of yes last year. Different podcasts, different events, different things. And sometimes you just have to shift that season. So having that conversation with Jay made me question, oh, fucking hell, Brian, you've been way overcommitted. I'm like way more stressed than normal. And I'm like, that's because I'm saying yes to too many things. I have a chapter in my second book, Rewire Your Mindset, about how to say no. Literally in a full fucking chapter. And then I forget it sometimes. And I just get a reminder from somebody. So the podcast makes it so valuable for me on a personal level. It's part of the reason why I keep it. So again, very wide-ranging way of the human condition, which I probably haven't fucking answered, Dan. But that is one of the reasons why I keep it and why I get so much from it.
Yeah, no, a very refreshing take on that there. That it pulls a lot of pieces together for me. Harmony, balance, and success. Before I dive into those, I didn't have the personal experience you had, but working in the environment I did in a medical clinic, I met a lot of people who were similar enough, very successful, had all the trimmings, came in the flash suits, the nice cars, celebrities, people who would be well known. And within 20 seconds, you very quickly realized, okay, yeah, I like this part, but I wouldn't take all these parts.
Yeah.
And that was a really important realization for me. And the way you described harmony, balance, and success there, all of those things are so subjective. And I think when we listen to podcasts and read books and watch TV and go on Instagram, we're getting what we think is an objective view of how the world is. This is what success looks like objectively, because everybody agrees. 1 million people agree that guy that you met was successful because they all followed him on social media for some reason. But subjectively, he wasn't where he wanted to be. So let's use the word happy. This is a word we'll bandy back and forth all podcast, but he wasn't happy because he was struggling in other areas of life. And most people probably wouldn't give up you wouldn't have given up what you had to be in his position.
No.
But 5 seconds before you met him, you probably would have considered it.
Yeah.
So that idea of harmony, I like that in there because success is completely subjective to me. And this hasn't been my biggest takeaway from all these types of conversations. Success it's in here. It's not out there. And meeting all these people has just cemented that fact for me. But like you, I forget it all the time. I have to meet more people to constantly be reminded by it. And then that idea of harmony. I think when people hear the word balance, you very nicely described there what you would like your life to look like with all the moving parts. I was laughing when you were saying about me and the kids in harmony. You ask my fiance if there's harmony a lot of the time. Can't even spell fucking harmony in my house. But if I was to actually sit and look at my life right now and take time, I'm really, really happy. The pieces aren't all exactly where I'd like them to be, but I have a really nice mix of all these different elements. I explained earlier on, I'm still playing football at 36 years of age. At the level I want to play at, I've got a family, they're happy, they're healthy, they're lovely. I've got a business that's tipping along and moving in the right direction. None of those things objectively are like super successful. But for me, where I am right now, harmony is probably the word that sums all that up. So I really like how you've described that there.
Can I add on that, Dan, just because it's a great point? Success is very subjective, and one of the things I learned over the years was that exactly, that you have to determine what it looks like, because you default to objectivity that, for me, again, false consensus bias, because I thought everybody else thought it. Lots of money, attractive spouse, a successful business, status, and health was in there as well, in terms of like, if it wasn't healthy, none of it mattered. But as I got more clear, I won't even say older, I'll say more clarity. Similar to you, I can bring my daughter to the playground on Thursday evening and pick her up from school. That's success. That's success for me. I can choose to do that. I can go to Dublin the night before a storm with my other half and stay in a hotel because I have financial luxury to be able to just do that. And I have the time that I can pick up and go. And I have a support network of people who will pick up my daughter from school because I have to come up for work, or I get to come up from work, which is probably more accurate. And that's really important. And one of the things, I hate being one of those twats that's always quoting their books, but like it's like it's just nature of the beast. One of the things that got quoted back to me the most from Rewire Your Mindset was the chapter on, do you even care about tennis? And this is the one I go back to regularly. Do you even care about tennis? Basically means I didn't play tennis. I have no ties to tennis. I have no interest in tennis. So if a friend or someone I know wins Wimbledon, I'm like, cool, good for them. I don't value that. But what I do value, and what I did value, was things like people that were authors and podcasters, because my identity was wrapped as an author. My identity was wrapped as an influencer during one period of time. So followers mattered to me. My identity was wrapped as a podcaster. So I would compare myself directly against people who were doing better with books, or people who were doing better with a podcast, or people who had more followers online. What I didn't know a decade ago that I know now is I've chosen to give those things value. Brian Keane has chosen that this is important to me, and that's what I'm going to compare myself against. I never compare myself against Djokovic or Federer or anyone that plays tennis, because I don't give a fuck about tennis. I don't care about it. So everyone has versions of this. When I played GA, it was the same. The lads who were on the county team were the lads you looked up to, because you're like, well, that's what I want to do. Like when you're in business, you're comparing against people who, for me in the early days, were making more money. Now it's not about money, it's about freedom of choice. But in the early days for me, it was, I'd look at someone, making 7 figures and go, fuck, I'd love to make 7 figures. How do I do that? And that was because that was all subjective to me. And until you pull yourself out and realize that actually you've decided this thing is important, you're choosing to compare yourself because you see value in this thing, whatever it is, sport, business, body composition, etc. That's cool, but otherwise it takes over for you. You end up becoming completely blind to it. And that's the issue I have. And comparison syndrome is something that I talk a lot about on my channels, that, compare and despair is an old cliche, but it's true. And comparison being the thief of joy, that Theodore Roosevelt quote. There's a reason those things circulate, because they're very true for a lot of people. And something I do with comparison, I spoke about this when I was in here with Rebecca Holland, that if you choose to compare up, by all means, take inspiration from people ahead of you. I do. Like, I look up to the Chris Williamsons of the world. I look up to the Tim Ferrisses of the world, people who I deem to be great interviewers on shows. And because I value host and interviewing in podcasts, I take inspiration from those guys. But you also have to compare backwards. And we rarely do that. You need to look at people who are further behind you on the journey, because what happens is otherwise you get miserable with the compare and despair of people who are further ahead. You go, well, fuck, why don't I have that? Why am I further along? Why, is that person doing better than me? When that's one subjective area of a particular point that you've decided is important, but you never look back at the people who are behind you. And there was a time for me, and I have to remind myself of this regularly, when I would have given my left arm to be in the position I'm in now. 100%. Like, I worked as a teacher. I fucking hated my job. Like, worked as a teacher for years and was just like so unfulfilled. Every Monday I would just dread going into work. Every Friday I'd be elated it was the weekend. And there was a time when I would have given my left arm and be like, fuck it, I'll just do it one, to be in the position now where I get to do podcasts and write books and do programs and, have the freedom financially and of time to be able to spend and do what I want with people that I want to do it with. I would have given my left arm for that. So sometimes you have to anchor yourself in that position, because it's so easy to get either addicted to progress or addicted to comparison. And that rarely helps, especially when you are moving in the right direction. Your ladder is up against the right wall and you are progressing, but you just fail to see it because you're looking at this other person who's further ahead. So that's something I'd get a lot of people to do is, look, if you insist on comparing upwards, try and first to take inspiration first from them. And then second, think about the people that are behind, or even the old version of you who was further back on the journey. And that gives a little bit of perspective, which I think is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like to wade into that one a little bit as well, because the comparison thing is interesting. When I see Federer win Wimbledon, I get a bit jealous. And then I ask myself, why do I get a bit, I don't give a fuck about tennis either. But it's because I'm craving the connection and the respect and the love that I perceive he is getting because he's in this position. We're all looking at him. We're all praising him. I want that for me. And if it's fucking tennis, I'll do it. If it's tiddlywinks, I'll fucking do it. There's an element of all of us, I think. Yeah. And sometimes when I have conversations with people around the comparison, like, because comparison TV joy is one of my favorite quotes. I have to say it to myself 20 times a day when I find myself inevitably comparing myself to somebody else. I'm always trying to really dig a little bit deeper then, because I do find with myself and other people I've spoken to, knowing that is one thing and understanding that is another thing. And once I started to understand that it wasn't the fucking tennis I was craving, it was something much deeper, then I could actually start to have a little bit of look at, why am I craving that? And are there other ways that are aligned with the things I actually like doing where I can get that? And potentially it could be improving my relationship with my partner. Potentially it could be friendships. Potentially it could be, maybe it is working on my business, but not necessarily to earn money so people will think I'm cool. I actually had a funny experience. I think I might have mentioned this one before, but I've done a couple of psilocybin ceremonies.
That was so weird you said that, because I was literally, when you were talking about blending thought and emotion, like I did psilocybin 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
You're applying for this podcast.
Yeah. I've done 3 psilocybin trips.
Okay.
But I did 2 weeks ago. But I always think of, sometimes when you know what's going on logically in your head, what the psilocybin does for me is it blends it into that you're emotionally able to feel what you logically know is true.
100%. I got the most vivid graphic visual of this particular one, right? And it was, no disrespect to anyone driving black BMWs, but it was about a black BMW. So I was lying there and I was seeing this played out in front of me. I was seeing myself look at somebody driving a black BMW, this guy, and he was getting all the applause. It was love. He was getting connection, love, and respect. But he was getting, everyone loves him. The black, look at that cool guy, cool car, Bluetooth headset, all the kind of wankery things. No disrespect. And I drive a Skoda, by the way. And I was seeing myself go, right, what I need to do is take my time, energy, and effort and pour it into working really hard. If I work really hard, I can make loads of money. If I make loads of money, I can get this BMW. If I get this BMW, finally, everybody will love and respect me. And then I had this like light bulb moment. I was like, or I could take all that time, effort, and energy and put it into myself and the people around me, and immediately have that sense of connection and love and respect that I crave, and be a better person. And I just started laughing uncontrollably, and I just started to see the cycle over and over and over again. It's black BMW, and it was so graphic and visual, but it was that thing I logically knew, and all of a sudden a really deep emotion connected with that for me. But it was that idea of, it helped cement for me, whether it's Wimbledon, the black BMW, the money, whatever it is, usually, and I would say in 99.9% of cases, it's a fundamental human need not being met, that I'm looking to meet there. And if I can understand and figure out what that is, and then potentially find maybe a healthier way of expressing that or finding that for myself, that for me has been a big driver in actually taking action. Because I knew comparison with Steve Joy 20 years ago. Think I did fuck all about it?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not.
But you knew it up here though, pointing to my head. Like you know it logically. There's the connection between knowing something logically and from a prefrontal cortex standpoint and emotionally feeling going, I'm being fucking stupid here. Like I need to not, this thinking isn't helping me, or I know I should think like this, but I can't feel it. Like bridging that gap. And this isn't a recommendation for everyone to go do mushrooms, even though probably a lot of people would. Go do mushrooms. Sponsored by Psilocybin. But like it's an incredible experience. Like they're like I've done quite a lot with psychedelics. I've done 10 ayahuasca ceremonies and I've done 3 psilocybin trips. Very important. Very, for me, like sometimes you just need the mirror shine back at you to be like, this is how you're showing up. This is what's important to you. I haven't always historically been the best with it. Whereas psychedelics, if you're in the right position, and this isn't a recommendation because you can have a psychotic break on them. I had the most horrible experience. I had one bad psychedelic with my ayahuasca and it was the worst experience of my life, bar none. And I've torn my fucking Achilles in the Arctic running an ultramarathon. I've got horrible injuries. All these things have gone. That was the most horrible experience of my life, a bad ayahuasca trip. But generally, and I love the Carl Jungian quote that what you most need is where you least want to look. And sometimes what psilocybin can give, it's a bit softer than ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is like the harsh mother plant, whereas psilocybin's a bit more like the laugh plant. I think it's like you just laugh at yourself for being so fucking stupid. You're like, why are you being so serious? That was a big thing for me when I did it. It was like, why are you getting upset or stressed about silly games that you're playing? The Naval Ravikant says, play silly games, win stupid prizes. Yeah. And that was happening where, you know, the money or followers or body composition or whatever it is. And there's definitely a level, like money will get you freedom. Body composition at a certain level will increase your health markers so that you know, have a higher quality and potentially a higher quantity of life. But putting all your stress into it and getting stressed about it because your body fat's a little bit heavier or your money's a bit lower or your follower count's not as high or you're not growing as much as you want, similar to you, that's an internal need that's not being met. And sometimes when you're able to either connect with the people around you or reconnect with yourself, which is super woo and hippie, but like there's an element of truth to that all the psychedelics do is they're reconnecting you, and that true self gets thrown around a lot. Again, a bit of a cliche, but it's true. Like it's bringing back, like if you think about I love the line from Michelangelo about the statue David, that he's like, David was underneath all the marble. I just had to carve away until I got it. Your true self is kind of similar to that. You've accumulated all this bollocks over the years, thoughts, beliefs, experiences, culture, parental stuff, family members, friends, teachers, and you're just trying to clear all that shit off and unlearn all that stuff that doesn't support you anymore. Like in my 20s, I felt there was a lot of addition where I had to learn things, educate myself. When I hit my 30s, I was like, all right, it's time to subtract. You know, Lao Tzu says, you know, that the art of happiness is subtraction, not addition. And I started to subtract things and unlearn things that weren't supporting me. And that was life-changing for me.
I didn't think we were going to go down this route, but I think it's definitely worth exploring. That's that Buddhist idea as well of clearing the mud. The golden nuggets under them, which is adding layers of mud. I had Adam Starr on the podcast. He's a Buddhist meditation teacher, and that one of my favorite conversations of all time. It's so simple. Back to a point I wanted to make actually at the start of the podcast. You made a lovely point about most people know most of this stuff. Most people, definitely people listen to this podcast and people listen to your podcast, or people like the only people who listen to these types of podcasts are people who are interested in growing and personal development. They know this. Everyone knows this. We know most of the things we need to change and grow. It's the application and it's that emotional connection and quote unquote, I'm doing here, the motivation, that internal intrinsic desire or why, I suppose, all these buzzwords. And yeah, I agree. Psychedelics, I'm not particularly practiced. I've done a couple of psilocybin ceremonies. I've shared before. I had a couple of medically supervised super high dose ketamine therapies. One of which was life changing. One of which was like yours, the most scary, worst thing I've ever done in my entire life. Simply because I didn't understand the tool. I didn't understand what to expect, and I didn't surrender to the process and really understand that. It stripped away all my mud and all my behaviors, which was my armor, my protective mechanism, and just left me there trying to figure out what the fuck is going on here. But I view psychedelics or plant medicine, whatever way you want to look at it, as simply another tool. But I think in today's world, where a lot of the chips maybe are stacked against us in terms of distraction and comparison, all those different things, it's probably a necessary tool for many of us, as you said, not all of us, but many of us. Because yes, we can meditate, yes, we can do breath work and journal, but like in a lot of cases, you have a big mountain of mud to be moving there, and you're kind of just chipping away. And how long do I have to chip away? I often wonder that. I'd be interested in your perspective on this. A lot of this personal development stuff, at what point do I get lost in the world of personal development and forget to actually live my life?
I love that question. That's a belter, because this actually happened to me. The second round, so with the ayahuasca retreats, they're done in rounds of 3. And the second round, I did my first one in July or June of 2022, and then the next one was the following year. And in my second round, I could feel a little bit of that lost, where you get so introspective and you're so tuned into, what's important for me, what's the universe, what's all this, and you fucking forget to live your life completely. I think, and something that I've changed my mind about more so in recent times, is one, what plant medicine will do, ayahuasca, psilocybin, etc., from my experience, is it reveals things to you. It'll show you what's important. It'll show you the silly stuff you're doing. And you can get lost in that completely. And you end up mentally masturbating effectively. Or you end up plant medicine masturbating, where you're doing something without doing anything.
I think that's a different thing, actually.
Well, that's fair. Yeah. We won't get into that. Like, if you're into plants and you want to fucking rub them all over you, go for it. Like, no judgment. Each to their own. You're into whatever you're into. But I always tell people with books, don't mentally masturbate with books. Where people would read book after book after book, personal development book after personal development book after personal development book, or course after course after course, and not take action with it. I'm like, that's mentally masturbating with courses and books. I was like, it feels like you're doing something, but you're actually not doing anything. And plant medicine and psychedelics, from my experience, can be very similar, where if you don't apply the lessons you got from the experience, nothing changes. And I've known, there was a guy who I met at my first retreat, and he was actually randomly on my third one as well, he'd done ayahuasca over 100 times. And that's no judgment. He's going through his stuff, doing his stuff. But it didn't seem to me from our conversations like he was applying anything he was learning from it. And that's why he kept going back. So I was very mindful. Like, I think it was a bit of a mirror for me, because I have a very addictive personality by nature. I get very into things, but I can get very tunnel vision, which is actually very serving in some areas, but very unhelpful in others, because you can lose balance, you can lose harmony. It's literally why I use those words so often, because they're not natural to me. Like, I have no problem getting shit done. I have no problem executing. They're not problems for me. If anything, I have too much execution, where you have shiny object and you're like, right, let's try this, let's try that, let's try this. But that leads to a lot of quote unquote external success from the outside in. But I struggle with balance and harmony because I get so tunnel vision. So I use those words a lot to remind myself of what to focus on, because we all have natural strengths and natural weaknesses, and you're just trying to bring everything into balance. So I think with any plant medicine, and the same with, any modality of potential healing or self-reflection or self-awareness, if it's starting to hinder your life, workout's the same, training's the same.
Literally going to say exercise.
Yeah. Exercise. Like, I know this. I was in here chatting with Natalie Lennon about this in here as well. Like, exercise is, in the right dose and quantity, improves your health markers, improves your energy, improves your hormonal function, improves your body confidence with yourself, improves a whole host of things. Excessive exercise does the reverse of all those things. So the danger is really in the dose, and it goes for everything. And I think plant medicine and psychedelics are the same. There's a point where you'll use it, and that might be one trip, and that does you for 5 years. And you've got exactly what you need. One of my friends who's in this space, and I love the line with psychedelics, and he was talking about ayahuasca in particular. He's like, when you get the message, put the fucking phone down. He was like, you got the message, don't keep going back. And I live it by that. So I did an ayahuasca retreat last year. I was supposed to do 3, and I did the first one, got what I needed, and was like, I'm good. I was like, this is it. I was like, I'm good now. I was like, I got exactly what I needed. I don't need to go to 2 more. And I told the shamans that I was doing it with, I was like, I'm good. I was like, I got everything I needed last night. I'm fine. And that was over a year ago. So I think there's an element of that. And again, I know we've gone off on a fucking psychedelic side thing. Yeah, but just for people to know sometimes, and I'm not an expert in this, definitely not, but sometimes knowing and hearing other people's experience can guide you with what you should do, because it's something that's very easy to get excessive with, similar to exercise, particularly if you have an addictive personality. I think plant medicines, psychedelics are definitely in that area where you could get addicted quite quickly. I could 100%, because you become a bit of a self-awareness, personal development junkie, and I've identified with that at different stages in my life. And ayahuasca, and the analogy I used, I did a podcast, it was one of my most downloaded episodes of 2022, was on my experience with ayahuasca, and the language I used was, it was like 15 years of therapy in a weekend with a therapist who knew me better than I knew myself. That's how it felt. But that pulled a lot of people in, and they were like, okay, ayahuasca. Like literally, I had the Rogan effect, the Oprah effect. They sold out the retreats for the rest of the year off the back of the podcast. People couldn't get into them until the following year because of the podcast. And I didn't even mention the crowd I went with on the podcast. I said, message me if you want it, because I've just, people change, shamans want to change, all these things. So I didn't want to go, I have no affiliation with the shamans I used and the retreat I used. And they sold out off the back of it. So I was mindful that I have a bit more of a responsibility now to tell people that, yes, it can be an amazing experience. It can give you a lot of healing and internal work that you need to work through and reveal what is important to you. But it's not all incredible, and not everyone should do it. And some people just aren't in the right place for it. Same as exercise, same as, steroids in bodybuilding. I've had IFBB pros on the podcast, and they're very open about their steroid use. Like, if you're using steroids to become a pro bodybuilder, that's different to, fuck it, actually, I just want to train 3 times a week instead of 4, and I'm going to take steroids for that. Because I'm all for, go do what you want to do, put what you want into your body. But your IFBB pros, your people who are at the top level of the bodybuilding game and are open about the drug use, are like, I'm training twice a day, 6 days a week. Like, I'm trying to step on stage for Mr. Olympia and become Mr. Olympia. This is what's going to help me get there. That's totally different than shortcutting it because you want to be and have bigger arms for coppers at the weekend. Like, which is fine. Get your bigger arms for coppers at the weekend, but maybe don't put a drug into your body for that. So I think you can apply it to exercise, you can apply it to drugs, you can apply it to plant medicines. The same truth holds true all the way, regardless of what you're speaking about, and just be mindful and put a bit of a common sense approach and just put the mirror back on yourself and go, well, look, is this thing helping me or hindering me? Because at some point it actually might go in the opposite direction where it's not helping you anymore.
It's our pal Carl Jung again. Like, it's all of the things you've mentioned. I've had similar conversations with similar people that you have had, and it's the same observation. I learned this in medicine first. Not a doctor, worked in a medical clinic for 12 years. We use steroids quite a lot in a very, very positive capacity to help heal. It's just a thing. Alcohol is just a thing. Psilocybin is just a thing, and for me it's not like I'm also not an expert in plant medicine or psychedelics as well, but for me it's less a conversation about the ayahuasca or whatever, and it's more a conversation about that idea of until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life and you call it fate. This I say really quick because I've said that quote so many times in the podcast.
Love that quote. It's one of my favorite quotes ever.
I've written so many notebooks. But it's that idea of if having big arms and coppers is something you've consciously decided is aligned with who you are, and I want to work on this, take the fucking steroids. Same as the IFBB Pro. If they're really, really, because I've had 2 types of conversations. I've had conversations with people in that sphere, bodybuilding, who are really dialed in, and they're like, I understand actually powerlifting is a better example. I know a lot of powerlifters. One of my clients runs his powerlifting podcast here. I made a lot of these, like one of the guys who was in the first man in Ireland to hit a total 1,000 kilos at a powerlifting competition, and they're all on steroids, and they're fully aware that this is not a healthy approach, but they have categorized, okay, this is where I value my health. This is a thing I want. I've also had the other type of conversation with someone who says, this is what I want. And when you dig just beneath the surface, it's crippling insecurity. It's not actually what they want. So it's very hard for us then, who are walking around and unconsciously most of the time, to, like, we've never even had that conversation. We've never even had that thought, but we associate the bigger arms and coppers with more love and respect because that's what's going to get us the attention, and that's what's going to get us respect from the fellas and love from the ladies, and that's just love and attention.
The BMW equivalent.
It's the same thing. So with the plant medicine, for me, I made the same observation. I would have seen people, and I still see people who are firmly embedded in this, and they're 100, 200 ceremonies in. I'm like, that's the same as me being addicted to my phone. It's the same as me being an alcoholic. No judgment. Zero judgment. What's the other quote? If you're dependent on something, it's no longer serving you. It's a dependence. I heard that with caffeine first. If you need a coffee every day, we discussed, but we're super sensitive, so I'm very cautious of my caffeine use, but it's a tool for me now. It confers massive benefits to me if I'm conscious around its use. As soon as I forget that, I'm dependent on it. I need a coffee. It's no longer serving me because now I'm dependent on it. That goes for everything, in my opinion. So, like, that human condition question at the start, it's like when you start to look at things this way, you just see it in yourself. And when you see it in yourself, you see it everywhere. All of these trappings, plant medicine, BMWs, bodybuilding, big arms and coppers, whatever it is, there's a version of that can be extremely healthy and fulfilling, and there's a version of that. So none of these are objectively good or bad, which is why none of them can be objectively successful. So that, like, it's very, very nice to hear you say that from all the experience you've had as well, and your personal story there, because that's been my biggest observation, I'd say. From doing the podcast as well, we get to the end of like a 2-hour conversation, like, So it's the same thing again.
Yeah.
Introspection.
Success leaves
bit of
clues.
awareness, success leaves clues.
And opposite of success leaves clues.
Yeah.
Like there's patterns, failure leaves patterns, success leaves clues. Like you start to have these conversations with people and go, fucking hell, I'm doing that exact same thing just in this area.
Just over here.
Yeah.
And you're doing it over here.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you're an expert in this space, and I'm not an expert in any space, but we're the same thing. Like we're doing the same thing. And very, very interesting. The next little topic, I'm going to look at my book at some point during this, but this is flowing really
There's
nicely.
about 40 questions here.
I never look at them, but in this one, I'm like, I want to keep this some shape on this. But mindset and resilience are two words I'm going to bring into the conversation for you next. You've literally written books on these. You've had conversations on these podcasts. You've, for me anyway, demonstrated these in the real world by some of the physical and performance events you've taken part in. Mindset and resilience are very buzzy at the moment. Everyone's talking about mindset. Everyone's talking about resilience. But I like to break those down further and understand, like, from the resilience point of view, what are the behaviors that you have observed and you've learned about and you've experienced that make you resilient, either physically, emotionally, spiritually? I know they're all very broad areas there, but I'll let you percolate on that one.
I love that question. It's interesting. So resilience was an area that I thought I would spend more attention focusing on. So when I started Rewriting Your Story, which is the new book, the original title for that was 8 Simple Habits for Building Mental Resilience. That was the original title. I thought I was going to write a book on mental resilience. And as I started to research it and reflect in the writing process, I started to see that it's not resilience that I have, or that there's an element of resilience here, but resilience is what people see from the outside. And it's underpinned by a whole host of other things. And I ended up changing the title to Rewriting Your Story as a result of what I discovered as I was going through this journey of what resilience is, because people will look at me and see, a Google list of the things you've done, bodybuilding shows, Marathon De Sable, running through the Arctic, 100-mile ultramarathons, adventure races, insert, excessive
Spray tans.
Spray tans, most importantly, that's top of the list. And do you know what? We say this, I'm going to sidetrack. 100-mile ultramarathon, which I did in Nevada in 2020, which took me 26 and a half hours. I would do that again, then fucking have to shave my body for bodybuilding shows. Shaving my body for bodybuilding shows, it felt like and again, masculinity, femininity, they're not my area, but it was the most, I hated it. I hated the whole process of like shaving my body hair and spray tanning on top of it. I felt like a fucking, I don't know what, I felt like a goon. Like, I just, every time it happened, I was like, what am I doing?
Did you feel like you were stripping away your manhood?
It did, a little bit, like bit by bit, like literally razor by razor and blade by blade. I was like, oh, Brian, what are you doing? Like, so yeah, that's just a side thing.
Actually, you mentioned you got spray tan at the bodybuilding show. Surely you get spray tan before that.
No, they do it at the shows. So like with the big shows, the big shows. So you get a coat the night before and then a coat the morning off, depending on. I've quite dark skin, so I get the multiple coats, but you just get them sprayed beforehand and you're fine. But it depends. Like if you're super, super white, you have to get multiple coats, multiple layers. But no, they do it on the morning of it as well. And then you wash it off. It just depends on the tan. Okay. But the bigger shows, that's just a past life. Like, fuck it. I'm
literally just clipping this in the podcast.
Yeah. That's it. Just with some photos of me just spray tanning. Like, yeah, thumbs up. But shit, what was the fucking question? Oh, resilience. Yeah, resilience. So you have to be very resilient to get spray tans. So resilience, I found, was something that was kind of the external looking in. People were labeling me as resilient, same way as I've labeled other people as really resilient. I've had Ross Edgley on my podcast a few times, and I love Ross.
Ross on?
Yeah, Ross been on 3 times. I think.
Ross was. I had 3 names. I can't even remember the other 2. Ross was the first name I wrote on the page before I ever started this.
Ross, amazing. He's a wonderful, wonderful human being. He's one of my favorite people in fitness because of what he can do, how he documents it. But he's also just a wonderful person.
His attitude
is amazing, and he's just like that. Yeah. Because sometimes something that I didn't. I won't say perceive or think what happened beforehand was sometimes you meet people online and they're not like how they are online. Like sometimes they're nicer, sometimes they're not as nice. Ross is exactly as he comes across online. Like he's full of life, he's full of energy. I couldn't say enough positive things about him. I also think he's just an incredible athlete. Like he's a machine. And I think he does great messaging online in terms of he uses himself as a guinea pig and documents it. I think he's a tremendous message. But like I would look at Ross and go, he's extremely resilient, and he is. But that they were labels I was putting on him, the same way as people were putting the labels on me. When I started to underpin it, I realized that it wasn't that I was particularly resilient. I had learned kind of a set of skills that added up to making me resilient. One of them was, and again, discipline ties in closely with resilience, but like doing things that were like what I call my daily discipline anchors. I talk about those in Rewire Your Mindset. I've got 3. So running every day or running every training day, reading, and what's my last one? Getting up early. They're the 3 ones that they're automatic to me now. They're habitual to me now because none of them come naturally to me. I read a lot, but I'm not naturally a very good reader. I like audiobooks, but I struggle sometimes to physically read. But I physically read now because it, again, moves your life forward in a positive way. Same as getting up early. I'm not an early bird by nature. I'm definitely a night owl, but getting up earlier makes my life better. So I do that. And the same with running. I'm very vocal on my podcast how much I hate to run. Like you see me, like I'm 5'8", 85 kilos. Like I'm built like a bodybuilding hobbit. Like that's my build. So I'm not designed for long distance runs. So, but it makes me very mentally resilient and mentally tough when I do it. And it's building off anchors of discipline, like a wall of discipline each day. That helps with the resilience. Checking in regularly with, is this thing making me happy? Or that my filter is this thing or person going to nourish me or deplete me? That's a huge area for resilience, because the more nourished and energized you are, like people think time management is the problem in life. It's not. It's energy management. It's managing your energy. And the more energy you have, the more execution you're able to do on things that are important, the more resilient you become in that thing, whether it's exercise, fitness, nutrition, business, GA, soccer, sport, whatever. You need to be nourished and energized for that. So putting things through a filter of, will this or this person nourish or deplete me, is really helpful. Because if you're spending a lot of time with people who are depleting you, or you're spending a lot of your days doing things that make you feel really depleted, it's very hard to be resilient anywhere. Like they talk about in the stories around willpower, or the research around willpower, that willpower is finite, meaning that if you use this, 500 ml water bottle, you've got this amount of willpower every day. Depending on how you use it is up to you. So if you're using your whole morning making decisions, decision fatigue, Steve Jobs talked a lot about this, about how he used to wear the same thing every day, so he didn't have the decision fatigue. Mark Zuckerberg talks about it too with Facebook. That's down to increasing willpower, where you're not making decisions, you're not depleting willpower by staring at a box of chocolates in the morning, and you're using the willpower to not eat the chocolate. And then by the evening, that's all gone and you end up binging on food. This is something I specialize a lot with fitness clients. But they're things that you need to be mindful of in terms of energy management through the day and willpower through the day. And when you stack it all up with your discipline, with your doing the things that you know you should do because they'll make your life better, although you don't feel like doing them. That's basically what, podcast. I've used this line hundreds of times because it always comes back in some shape or form. Successful people do the thing they have to do regardless of how they feel. I see that come back time and time and time and time again. And when you're building up this discipline, when you're building up this filter of, I'm feeling nourished, because I'm quite a high energy person, but that's not by accident. I'm high energy because I do things I love to do. I work with people. Now I'm, again, focus group of 1 here. I'm in a very luxurious position. I've been doing and running a business for 12 years. I can pick and choose who I work with now. Not everyone has that luxury, or people are working jobs. They don't have that luxury of who they spend their time with. But doing things that nourish you through the day, whether that's your food, your sauna, your ice bath, your exercise, listening to this podcast, meditation, all these things can potentially nourish you. Staying on top of that and minimizing things that deplete you, they're what lead to higher energy. And the more energy you have leads to that execution, which actually ends up leading to the more confidence that comes from the execution, which ultimately gives you the resilience from the outside. That was what I ended up unpacking over the last year and a half, because it wasn't just that I'm a resilient person, because I'm not. That's not my default. I had to build that resilience. I had to build that discipline through regularly auditing who I was spending time with, what I was doing, and how I was spending my time. Tell me what you do every day. I'll tell you where you'll be in a year. Tell me how you eat every day. I'll tell you how you feel in a year. Tell me how you train every day. I'll tell you how fit you'll be in a year. Running things through that lens helps. And ultimately then, when that's all built, it's like this little house that people look on from the outside and go, he's a resilient person. That's what I've kind of come to terms with over the last year and a half.
Brilliant. This definitely bears really reinforcing here, because I've learned similar lessons. I found it really interesting actually, because I would be, okay, let me preface this, right? I believe that as human animals, I don't necessarily believe there are people who are just more resilient in general. I think, let's use the water bottle example first of all. You had a lovely example there about waking up with your bottle full. Imagine you've got a terrible night's sleep. Now your bottle's half full. Now you have less resilience motivation, whatever to use in that day. I don't believe some people are born with a 2-litre bottle. I think most of us are give and take 10% in and around the same of that just pure willpower. And then I believe it comes down to the systems and your own personal experience. And let me use a couple of examples here. Jocko is the discipline equals freedom. I remember hearing that first, didn't understand it. And then as soon as I listened to him speak, I was like, oh, okay. He's not saying I have to be a disciplined person and that's it. He's saying I can create an environment for myself that helps me to be disciplined. I don't have to brute force this. I don't have to wake up in the morning and force myself to do everything. I can, for example, leave my runners beside my bed. I've just created a win and made it easier for myself to go for the walk in the morning, go for the run in the morning, whatever it is. So me understanding that creating that environment for myself is going to set me up for wins. And I had people come to me because I've never done the types of physical things you've done. I've played football at a high level, used to run in school and stuff like that. And I've always been kind of in the top percentage of people. I'm very competitive. And people come to me, especially over the last few years, saying, oh my God, you're so resilient and disciplined. I'm like, Jesus Christ, I'm the opposite. Like it's the willpower. I wake up in the morning time and I'm well rested, but I wouldn't be one of those people who's like, I'm good to go right now. I need the systems. And it was so interesting just to hear that from me, because I would have looked at you and Ross Edge and it's the same kind of thing. Yeah. Maybe there's biological differences, 10%, 5%, maybe, but most of it is what you've just said there, building the discipline, creating the structure. And I found that it's the exact same thing. I found that. And when we mentioned earlier on about the people coming in who are super successful in one area, they've built a good system in one specific niche of their life, usually at the cost of the systems at the rest of their life. Yeah. And let's take David Goggins as another example, right? David Goggins is a person who I dip into maybe 1% of my life every now and again. You maybe a little bit more if you run ultras and stuff like that. But someone like David Goggins, by his own admission, has a massive fear-based monster pushing him down the road. So he just doesn't have this natural level of resilience either that you should aspire to live up to, compare yourself against. Yeah. You don't want to be David Goggins. You'd be running from the shit that's in his head, like that darkness that consumes him. I'm never going back there. I'm never being that guy again. He is running from fear. So like all of these people we look at, and we're like, oh my God, they're so disciplined and resilient. They've just built this system. They have a set of behaviors. They have a set of tools. And why I think that's so important and bears repeating it, because that's empowering. So if you're listening to this, I take great solace from you saying it, and from you saying it's the same with Ross Edgley and these people. We can all do this. And even though, yes, I'm also in quite a luxurious position. I run my own business, have a lot of flexibility in my day. But I do think that in most areas of our lives, we have choices. And for me, maybe I have easier choices to make, but we can all, to a certain degree, decide certain things during our day. And those small things can lead to bigger things and lead to bigger things. And they're the kind of the systems and the environments I'm talking about there. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I agree completely. Like I'll mirror that back and echo it, because I read a lot. I've had a lot of conversations with people on podcasts. Weirdly, you mentioned David Goggins there, and I'm similar. Like I think David Goggins, and I use him as a tool. If I'm training for an ultra or a particularly difficult event, I listen to a lot of Goggins.
Carry those boats, bitch.
Yeah, 100%. Who's going to carry the boats? Just fucking repeating that shit. Goggins, weirdly, the only time ever, because David was supposed to be on the podcast and it got cancelled.
No way.
The only time ever
I've done like 4 podcasts.
Yes, he was the only time ever. He was doing an event in Dublin and he was supposed to come on to promote it. Yeah, it was the only time ever I was upset or disappointed when the guest cancelled, because I would have loved that conversation, because I think he's a fascinating man.
What would you have asked David Goggins? You don't have to give me, because you might still get him on now. You probably will still get him on, but
what I'd love to see, which I haven't heard him speak about, and I listen to a lot of podcasts that he's on because I get a lot of value from that. Like I always have the 2 tools in my arsenal that I regularly go to is tough love and self-compassion. They're 2 tools I'll regularly come back to. Tough love is one I will dip into a lot when I'm physically training. Get the fuck after it. Like finish your miles, finish your reps, lift the fucking weight. Tough love, cop on, Brian. Like there's no point being like, oh, it's fine. 25 miles into 26.2K.
You said you would do this.
Finish it.
Now do this.
Fucking finish it. That's tough love. But I also dive into self-compassion quite a lot. So self-compassion is when I've been a bit switched off with my partner or my daughter, or I haven't been fully invested in a conversation that I should be in. Like there's no point being tough, bringing tough love to that tool. Like it's the tool doesn't serve the purpose, and it's, using a sledgehammer when you need a knife. Like, and that's something I've got better with over the years. Like I just reflect and go, well, actually, maybe you need to be less distracted. You said yes to a lot of things today, and now you can't focus when you're having a conversation with your daughter because you've all these other things running in your head. I'll be self-compassionate on those days. Tough love is when I'm doing the physical stuff. So David fills up that cup of the tough love when I need it. And a question I would have asked him, and I probably will if we ever have the conversation, is I would love to know because he's a man with a tool. He's a man with a sledgehammer. He uses the same tool for everything. Now, it's the most powerful fucking sledgehammer in the world. But I would love to know, has he ever considered alternative tools to get to where he is? Or would he not trade that knowing this one works well enough? I'd love to know if he's ever had a path where he's dipped a toe into, right, maybe I actually need to face some of this shit and I need to take an emotional response and not just physically run through it. I'd love to know if he's ever put his toe into the water with that and then been like, decided, no, fuck that. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Because I've never heard him speak about that. And as somebody that has been through my own shit and has talked about my own stuff on my podcast, I was going down the Goggins route. I was going down that. You talked to me in 2017, 2018, training for Marathon De Sable. I was a fucking machine. Like, but not in a good way. I was a machine, like, shut all the emotions off and just get after it and get it done. I ran the Arctic the year after. I was starting to become, and I ran the last 86k of the Arctic on a torn Achilles. That was brutal. And I used it because Goggins had similar experiences. And I was like, well, fucking Goggins did it, I can do it. Like, and I would regularly draw inspiration from that. And it helped me, one foot in front of the other. I did that for 86k in the Arctic at fucking -40. And
you're icing as you go.
Yeah, it was exactly. Yeah, it was 100%. It's why my ankle didn't fall off, my Achilles didn't fall off. But it was things like that. I thought that's what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be the next Goggins or the Irish Goggins. But reality is you're never going to be the next anyone. You're always the first you. You're the first Dan, the first Brian. That, what I started to see was that extreme version. And I had friends who would point it out to me, being like, you're a bit fucking extreme. Like, and you're actually not being a very good dad right now. And I was like, oh, and that hits hard. Like, that still, that, like, even thinking back to that 2019, like, that hits hard when someone's like, you're not being a very good dad. You're not being very attentive or tuned in. Like, and sometimes you need someone to just shake you out of that. That this is the path you're going down. And then reflecting, oh, fuck it, this isn't the path I want to be on. I don't want to be on my 97-year-old deathbed and have a shit relationship with my daughter because I ran 1 million ultras. I was like, I don't like that. When you forward project, your forward projection, your psychological term for looking into the future and then bringing it back into the present. When I forward projected that, I was like, I don't want that. I was like, that'd be horrible. I was like, I'm going to end my life having done all these achievements and the people around me don't even like me that much. Don't mind love me. They probably love me because they have to, but they don't really like me. And that was a bit of a wake-up call. And that's something I check in quite regularly with. I do that 97-year-old rule when I'm making decisions and what would I regret more. And I have no problem doing these big challenges. I do. But it's the old quote, I think it's, I can't remember who it is, Clement, W.C. Clement, that, you know, don't forget the flowers at your feet when you're reaching for the moon. And I regularly just check in with that and go, right, is the thing I'm doing now, big challenge, insert big challenge here, negatively impacting my relationships and the things that are really important to me and really of value to me? And then I'll course correct. I have no problem. Quitting is something that I've had to change my relationship with because I was team no quit. And sometimes you should quit. If your ladder's up against the wrong wall, you should fucking quit. You're misaligned. You're in the wrong direction. You know, I spoke on here when I was talking about Natalie with the relationship I was in, that relationship should have ended a year before it did. But I was like, I don't fucking quit. I was like, work harder. Like, I was like, just do more and you'll make it work. As opposed to, fuck, this ladder's against the wrong wall. Not that there's anything wrong with that other person. She was a really good person. The relationship dynamic wasn't working. Same as when I was teaching. Like, the analogy I used was I felt I'd spent years climbing a ladder only to realize I was up against the wrong wall. If I didn't quit, I'd still be teaching.
The David Goggins of fucking primary school.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, exactly. I'd be there fucking teaching. Yeah. It's fucking get the boats and the literacy books. So that, and that's something to come back to regularly. Like, when you check in with that, you know, that's very important because sometimes you're like, actually, you fast forward and go, I don't like this. I don't like how this looks. And again, as I said, how the fuck we get onto that from David Goggins? Yeah, I've gone completely off on a tangent, but that's something I do regularly, is coming back to that. You know, is your ladder up against the right wall? Are you enjoying this process of climbing it? And if it's, I will quit things if they're misaligned. And if you're someone listening who has the I don't quit mindset, which can be very serving until it's not, sometimes it's worth, don't quit because something's hard. You can build discipline and resilience to get the thing done. That's different. Don't quit because it's difficult. Quit because it's misaligned.
Very nice. follow-up question with multiple elements to this question. You're quite introspective now at this stage. You do a lot of that kind of work outside of yourself for a moment. With all of the people you've spoken to who do incredible things, do you think it's possible to achieve these feats of insane human performance without that, let's call it the toxic fuel? And what I mean by the toxic fuel is like you can use things like anger and fear and insecurity and trauma as activation energy, but you use that thing long term. A lot of people talk about this now, but it poisons the well. You can't use that as forever, because you can't use that with your daughter. You can't use that with your family. Do you think it's possible to achieve these really extreme things, the Goggins level things? And you've done extreme things without that element. Can you push yourself? And the second part of this question, to kind of balance it, do you believe that the people who want to achieve these extreme things have actually sat down and thought about the rest of their life and how that fits in? Or do you think it's a direct response to running away from or to something?
Ooh, great question again. I have two answers, because one is for me personally and the other is for what I think is possible within human capabilities and possibilities. For me personally, no. So when I wasn't running off the hot burning fuel of anger and trauma and using those activations to get my shit done, like I had, if you saw some of the shit that went through my head, like, you know, like, and I have a great relationship with my dad now, and I fucking love him. I dedicated the new book to him because he's battled cancer. He's came through it. I consider him a mentor now, and I love him so much now. But for years, my why was his funeral and being like, fuck you, look what I did. That was underpinning me. That was driving me. Like other shit that I went through with people that, you know, abuse from when I was a child, but some other stuff that was external outside my immediate family. A lot of that was, fuck you, you didn't break me. You know, like you weren't supposed to do that shit when I was young, when I was 7 years old. Fuck you, look what I did. And if I ever see you again, I'm going to fucking kill you. That drove me. That was my fuel. So when I would check in with a torn Achilles, that's what kept me going. When I started to heal that and work through that, because it was making me a shittier person and it was making me a bad dad. And I didn't want to be that person. I don't want to fucking carry on those wounds and pass them on to my child. I want those cords cut. I want those connections cut. I don't want to be projecting that shit onto her. And that's what happens. It's very hard. It for me, and this might not be the same for everyone, it's all or nothing. I wasn't able to pick and choose. I couldn't tune in with anger and trauma and that fucking hate and also feel love and compassion and then show up like that for my daughter. I wasn't able. Some people might be able to do that. I couldn't. So it's not a coincidence that as I started to move through these things, my challenges became less extreme. Now, I also have a very high level of confidence in what I do because I back myself to achieve these things. So if you said, Brian, go and run a 100-mile ultramarathon in 6 months, I'm like, yeah, I could train for that. I know how to run a 100-mile ultramarathon. So it's different. So although you'll see potentially, and I might do one again in the future, there's confidence because you've done it. But if you ask me to run a 200-mile ultramarathon, something I haven't done, I'm like, oh, fuck it. One, I don't think I want to do that. And two, I don't think I even have the fuel underneath to drive me to do that. I don't have the hate. I don't have the self-hatred anymore. I've moved through a lot of that. So for me personally, I don't think I could achieve those incredibly extreme challenges in this day and age, nor do I want to. So that's a big difference. Will I still do challenges? Yeah, 100%. I love pushing my body. I love being able to see what it can do. I love being able to see how far can I go before it breaks down. I enjoy that. That's the fitness person in me. For others, I've had a privilege on the podcast of speaking with people who have different fuel sources. And Ross is a great example. And I've had others who have clearly some demons and monsters that they will admit to me, to the audience, to people listening, that this is driving them. They've been through some dark fucking shit and this is their fuel. And then you hear the people like Ross, who's like, I just want to fucking see what I can do. I love that about him. Like Ross did ayahuasca. Literally, we had the conversation on the first podcast. He was like, yeah, it was good. He goes, transform my friend's life. And he was like, my life was pretty good already. It was good. Don't need to do it again. That was it. That was literally it. And that's so Ross, because Ross is just like, just fucking, I want to see what I can do. I want to see what my body can do. Like, so I think as individuals, there's so many different things that drive us that the more people I speak to who are doing these incredible things, and I've spoken to, James Lawrence was a good one, the Iron Cowboy, the 50 Ironmans in 50 states in 50 days. Like, he was talking about some of the deep fucking shit that was driving him on fucking day 43, day 44, day 45. And then you've got Ross, who's just like, I want to see, can I swim around Great Britain? Like, so I think from individuals, it's so different. It's same as petrol or diesel for a car or electric for a car. Different things drive and are fuel for different people. And I think you don't need the dark demon trauma to do that, but you probably need some pull that you're like, I want to leave a mark on the world. I want to show people what's possible. I think Ross does. That's why I think he's such a great person. I think he's so inspiring because it shows you. Like, I remember when I ran through the Arctic and when I was training for that, Ross was training to swim through Great Britain, around Great Britain, and we spoke around that time on the podcast. And every time I would have to do a 20-mile run or a 30-mile run, I'm like, well, fucking Ross is training to swim around Great Britain. Like, I was like, I can run 20 miles today. I can do 30 miles today. So I was using him as a reference point. So everything is a reference point towards everything else. Like, and I think you can do that. Like, I used to listen to Cameron Haynes a lot, and he does 200-mile ultramarathons. So when I was training for the 100-miler, I'm like, well, fucking Cam is doing 200 miles. I can do the 100-miler. Like, so you're using these extreme examples to pull it back.
Yeah.
And sometimes people use me and they're like, well, look, Brian did 100-miler. I can run a marathon. And that's what it's all about effectively at the end of the day. It's just, moving people forward in a positive way.
It's interesting. I was thinking there, back to the Wimbledon question and then inserting Ross Edgley in there. Ross is one of the very few people, I would posit to you, right, that Ross is an outlier, not just in terms of what he does, the physical feats that he does, which are absolutely incredible, but to be able to do it from that place of love and happiness and curiosity. I don't know how many, even Cam, I'm a big fan of Cam, it's not the same happy energy at all. There's a darkness with Cam too. And then Goggins is different again. So you've all these different, but I would posit that Ross is an extreme outlier, just be able to do those things with that happy curiosity and love and energy that he does. And when I think about Ross Edgley, I don't find myself going, fuck, Ross has done this, I'm a piece of shit. But when I look at Goggins, I'm like, I should be able to run 300 kilometers. I should be able to do that. It's a weird thing that happens to me. Maybe it's the negativity bias in human beings. But the reason I bring this up is I think it's important for us, all of us, as we're looking at these people, to go back to that question again, is do I need to use this as comparison or can I use this as inspiration? As you've said there, I can decide what I use this as, and Goggins can be a valuable tool for me, and Ross can be a very valuable tool for me for different reasons. Ross, bring a positive attitude to what you do. We're lucky to be able to do this. Connor, my friend Connor O'Keefe, do you know Connor?
Yeah, Connor's great.
But he taught me this lesson so many times over and over and over again, how lucky I am. And I've been using it for the last 2 years solidly when I'm in the middle of a hard training session, especially a session with the lads or whatever. And like, I'm a little bit older now. Maybe I'm not the fastest anymore or the fittest anymore where I used to be. And rather than saying, fuck, you got to get back up there and dominate here, I'm like, I am so happy to be here. And I'm happy that these lads are here. And it was Connor, purely Connor, just hammering it into me. I'm going to look at Ross, it's the same thing. I am so privileged to be down here. I'm going down tonight, 9 o'clock, pissing in my Friday night, 9 o'clock, the lads. I am buzzing to go down now because one day I'm not going to be able to do that. And today, there's people who can't do that. Thousands of people, millions of people who can't do that. So we can decide to reframe all these different things and experiences, including comparison. And it's just interesting. As you said, I never thought about it before. Ross is one of the few people, I've read his books, listened to every podcast he's ever been on, obviously except for yours, obviously, and really enjoy what he does. And I've never, ever found myself feeling negative after seeing him do something because I feel less than. I feel inspired. Yeah. And that for me, that's when inspired is one of those words we throw around, but that's real inspiration for me. I'm like, wow, look at that guy's attitude when he's doing this incredibly hard thing. And he died in a lake there the other day and he's staring in the hospital, completely delusional, smiling and saying, oh, that was amazing. How's everybody else doing? Yeah. Can I get a bit of cake? Like, that's incredible to me. That's real inspiration for me.
He's a testament though. It's a testament to him. It's a testament to his character. And what I'll say there, something that, because I do some of these extreme challenges, there's a little bit of an availability bias as well, because there's people who are doing it with love and happiness who just don't document it. They're doing these crazy challenges.
Great point.
They're just not documenting
Great
it.
Point.
So there's a little bit of an availability bias there as well. So what I love about Ross is he puts it out there for everyone to see. So it's an inspiration. Yeah. But there's a lot of people doing, I've met people on ultras, I've met people on challenges who have done, one of the lads in Marathon De Sable had done some of the craziest shit I'd ever heard. And he was just happy. He ran a hotel, half the year and then did events the other half of the year and was just loved that he got to do it. No social media. Didn't go on podcasts. Was literally just doing it for him, and was just doing it because he was like, "This is so cool." Like I get, like he was the guy that rocked up Marathon De Sable. I trained for 6 months for that, 6 back-to-back marathons through the Sahara. Was shitting a brick before I went. He rocked up with no kit, nothing, and literally just bought the stuff out in Morocco, and was like, "Oh, this is cool. I'm in the desert." Like what was my biggest challenge at the time was basically just 6 training days for him because of some of the stuff he did, and it was just doing it out of a place of love, like a guy from Kerry. Like an Irish guy. So there's an availability bias there as well. So there are people doing it, there's not everyone's documenting it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's really powerful. And sorry, this really bears saying, right? Because this has struck me like, I don't know why I didn't say this before. We're talking about people who do these extreme physical events. I have met so many people who are caregivers, who are bus drivers, who are parents with sick children. And they are the most beautiful, happy, inspiring people because they are doing it with the same Ross Edgley attitude. They're not out running marathons. Yeah. They're doing 20 hours a day with their child with some sort of issue that can't eat and sleep, or they're out giving their time to people in a shelter, or they're working really hard on a project that's going to change lives. And they're not going on podcasts, and they don't have social media profiles, and they are the most inspiring, beautiful people. And this sounds a bit cliche to say, but it's the same thing for me. It's Ross Edgley swimwear in Great Britain and having that positive attitude. Yeah. And there's plenty of people who have sick children and it's consumed them. And that's for me, that's the norm. Yeah. That's acceptable. If I had really sick children, I'd be consumed by it. Yeah. To be able to do that and have this attitude and decide I am going to live my life in a positive way and come from a place of love and not a place of fear or anger, man, that's inspiring to me. And I think that's the 99.9% of people who are inspiring. The Ross Edgleys, as I said, are the outliers. Yeah. And we have an availability, we can see them, and there's a lot of noise and stuff like that. Doesn't take away from what he does, but man, I really want to highlight those other people that I meet so regularly. I'm like, this is what a beautiful person. Yeah. The person working in the shop who's like, there's a guy actually, he works next door here. Every time you go in, he's smiling, he's happy, he makes you feel good. And he's not doing anything particularly glamorous. He could be out picking up cigarette butts after, and he's like, how are you today? And he wants to talk, and he's engaged. That's beautiful to me. That's inspiring. Agreed.
It's so interesting because 25-year-old me needed the influencers, the Ross Edgleys, the Cam Hanes, the David Goggins, etc. 37-year-old me is looking for it in the average person on an average day, and you're like, oh wow, that's a wonderful human being. Like that person who's just, there's a person similar to the shop where I get my petrol. And she works in Apple Green. Every time she comes in, she's like, how are you today? How is life today? Every time. And it was funny when I met my girlfriend several months ago. We were talking about, I pulled in. She goes, do you know the girl in there? I was like, I do know the girl in there. She was like, isn't she wonderful? Like someone like that who's just literally working in a normal store, Apple Greens, who's lighting up people's day with her energy. They're things that are all around us that you sometimes have to just be mindful to look out for. Yeah. Because it's there. And sometimes I get people are going through dark times and we get kind of caught in our own bubble. But there's happiness and joy and just wonder that people are putting out into the world that just keep an eye out for it on a day-to-day. Dan, can I take a slash break?
Yeah, let's go. This is Brian's ninth slashes he got here an hour ago.
Yeah, fucking put that straight into the podcast. Yeah, my little girl bladder.
Beautiful, looking good, looking lighter, looking lean, looking trim.
Oh, I fucking needed that, man. The last 10 minutes.
What the empty bottles for you?
I mean, 100%. That's what I should have fucking done. Yeah, I feel like I'm that person. It's fucking terrible.
It's like I have 3 kids. I'm well used to it.
Yeah.
Every 4 seconds, you're like, oh, it's another toilet break.
That's me. Literally, like with fucking Holly's 9. So like we're on the same bathroom schedule. Like it's fucking ridiculous.
That's gas. Brian, I'm gonna pull my book in here, right? Because I liked some of these questions. So I was writing them. I was like, that's a good question. Yeah. So I'm gonna move us on to not a quick fire round at all, but some more specific questions just about you running the podcast, the guests, things you've learned, etc. Has there been anything, an idea, a concept, or a guest that surprised you with all of your experience and knowledge? Because you're similar enough to me in how we approach this. To most people, like a lot of the fundamentals. You've had a lot of exposure. You've read a lot of books. You've done a lot of podcasts. You've written your own books. So at our age, we have a lot of exposure to a lot of the ideas. We're very familiar, even we might not be experts, but very familiar with a lot of the concepts and ideas, and especially the low-hanging fruit and the basics and principles, etc. Has there been anything that has surprised you, like significant? You've gone like, fuck. Okay, that's taking me back here.
Yeah. The episode with Matt Fraser. So Matt has won
CrossFit Games
at the time of recording, the most decorated CrossFit Games athlete of all time. I've actually since had Tia Toomey on as well, and she is the most decorated CrossFit Games athlete of all time. With Matt, it has actually made it into the new book, Rewriting Your Story, because it was so impactful for me. He was telling his experience of the 2015 CrossFit Games and his preparation, where he came second. And he explained that he ate well, but wasn't meticulous about his meals. He trained, but skipped an occasional session when he wasn't really feeling it. And he paid the price of second place at the 2015 CrossFit Games. And he had a line on that podcast, which there's a chapter in the new book, or a section in the new book. What would it look like if I left it all on the field? So he said, 2016, I'm fucking in. I'm going to do everything with my training, my nutrition, my sleep, my recovery, everything. And if I come third or I come last, fine, so be it. And he ended up winning the CrossFit Games by the biggest record margin at that time. And it really spoke to me that I'm regularly coming back to what would life look like if I left it all on the field. And I do this regularly because I'm a big Stoic guy. I read a lot of Stoicism, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, Cicero, and a life well spent is something that I think about a lot, that I don't want to get to my end of my life because you get one go around at it. You literally want to get, it's a cliche, but you get to your deathbed and be like, all right, I'm good to go. I fucking did everything I wanted to do. I lived the shit. It's like if you got one car, I don't want my car in pristine condition at the end of the life. I want that shit fucking battered and bruised and be like, that was a hell of a ride. So I do that regularly, and I check in with that regularly because it's very Stoic. Stoicism, small S Stoicism, not big S Stoicism with the stiffen up your tough upper lip. It's the reflection and not letting emotions control you. But also they do a lot of death meditations where you picture, negative visualization is literally where you picture the things that you care about most being taken away from you, and it pulls you back into a gratitude-based state. And I will do the death meditations regularly, that what do I want my life to look like at the end? And the language I use is, what would it look like if I left it all on the field? And I got that directly from Matt Fraser. That was his line on the podcast, and how it showed up the following year. So even when I'm doing family stuff or work stuff or races, it's like, what would it look like if I left it all on the field here? Like, be fully present in that podcast, throw yourself into that book, make sure that you're being and having that family trip or experience where you were fully there and you're not thinking about all these things you have to do when you get back. What would it look like if you did it all on the field? It's not easy. Like, the concept, like most things, is very simple, but not necessarily easy to implement, because you need to, I had to meditate because I couldn't fucking shut those thoughts down. Like, meditating was the biggest game changer for me over the last 3 or 4 years, because I wasn't able to meditate. I couldn't, those thoughts would just come. And overthinking is a superpower as an entrepreneur, because you're able to catch a lot of fires before they happen. There's Andy Grove wrote the book. I think it's, I can't remember, was it IBM? Only the Paranoid Survive. And that's great as an entrepreneur because it's true.
That's good to know.
Yeah. Like, and that was really useful to a point, but the same as everything we spoke about, it was useful to a point until it's not.
Long-term fuel. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I had to get better with being able to switch off, and meditation helped me with that. It made me realize I don't actually have to follow this next thought. I don't need to go with that. That's for another time. That's not for now. And that helps with being present, which ultimately comes down to the stuff that's important, whether it's podcasting, writing a book, being with a loved one, insert whatever's important to you here. But what would life look like if you left it all on the field is something I come back to regularly, and I got that directly from Matt Fraser.
You are a coach, so I feel comfortable asking you this question. You're obviously a coach from a fitness perspective. You're a business coach, you're a mentor for people as well. So you're well positioned to answer this practical question for me. Again, most people listening to this podcast will know about this. I've done the eulogy exercise a few times, write my own eulogy. Sounds a bit grim. It's actually really, really empowering. It's very empowering. And I think about death regularly. Man, when I think about, I'm not even going to do it now, I think about my kids. Fuck me. It tears me apart and instantly makes me a better dad.
Yeah.
Within a millisecond, I'm like, these kids are going to die. Not they're going to die one day, but what if it happened now? What if something happened? And then I'm just like, rather than spiraling out of control, I'm like, shift into gear, be a dad. And nothing else really matters. But for people who have heard this and struggle to implement this, You mentioned meditation as a tool you can use, but where would you start? Because a lot of these concepts are great and they sound amazing. They're fucking chewing gum for the brain, mental masturbation, all the lovely phrases. Brian Keane said it's great. I'm going to replay that quote now, put it on the wall. But actually doing that thing, again, in an environment that in a lot of cases is fucking trying to force you the other way. It's trying to distract you. It's trying to get you into the chaos. It's trying to pull you down into the darkness. Where would we start? Where do you start with something like that? Taking a concept like think about your death and have that make you live a better life now. What's a good way to start that? Like to just start getting some reps in.
It's a multifaceted answer, unfortunately, because I wish there was a silver bullet that I could give. It's back to nourishment, sleep, movement, nutrition, which is such a cliche thing for a personal trainer to say. But it's true.
There's a reason it's a cliche.
There's a reason it's a cliche, but it's a very truthful cliche that when you are trying to implement any of these ideas you're hearing from me, from you, from anyone that you listen to on podcasts or online or read in a book, energy management is massive and stress management is massive. If your brain's in a chronic state of stress, you're not able to implement ideas. There's been countless research studies done on this. There's a great book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Dr. Robert Sapolsky, which goes through cortisol, how it works in the body, and all the things that get hindered in the brain in terms of your ability to adapt or cement new habits that you're trying to form. And what I'd say here is you need to go back to the basics, which is boring, but they're the basics because they work. Your sleep, how high quality sleep you're getting, your 8-9 hours each night, track it if you need to. Your movement, your exercise, if you're lifting weights, walking, running, playing sport, your nutrition. You know, garbage in, garbage out is a very true adage with nutrition, like nourishing food, nutrient-dense foods, boring stuff, complete proteins, complex carbs, healthy fats. It's boring as fuck. Like, but it's true. Like, it's not faddy or it's not going to go viral anytime soon. But the successful people know that it's the basics that work. Schwarzenegger used to say it all the time about bodybuilding. He's like, go in and do your compound lifts. Like, it's like, do your squat. Like, that's it. Your squat, your bench, your deadlift. Like all these other fancy exercises, by all means play around with them, but like everything comes back to the basics. And they've have you heard of the Lindy effect by Nicholas Nassim Taleb? Yeah, so like there's a longevity element that the longer something's been around, the longer it'll stay around. So if a book's been out for 20 years, it'll stay out for another 20 years, etc. The reason people come back to nourishing food and compound lifts and they keep doing it is because it's trial and tested and it works. And if you're able to do all these things, what happens is your energy levels tend to go up. You tend to get a bit clearer on what's important. You end up managing your stress, which because like we all know when we're in a hyper stress state, 3 kids at home, you know this better than anybody. You can have it in a game, in a match when lads make mistakes. You get super fucking stressed on the pitch. You can have it in business when there's a million things coming at once. You make bad decisions when you're hyper stressed. Your brain doesn't function the same way. Your prefrontal cortex shut down, your amygdala kicks in, your fight or flight response kicks in, goes all the way down to the rest of your physiology, and you just make shit decisions. Like no one's ever been like, oh, you know, I was in a perfectly calm state and I called my wife a name I shouldn't have. No one's ever fucking said that. You've never said something you've regretted when you've been in that calm state. It's always when you've been hyper stressed or you shout at your kids. Like one of the things I do regularly with Holly, and I do because like if I get hyper stressed, unfortunately, it's our loved ones that get taken out on. I always put it because the problem is with kids, and I'm not a parenting expert, far from it. But
by the way,
yeah. This is Dan's wheelhouse. Dan's got 3. You're 3 times the expert I am for sure. So what I always do with her is because the problem is with kids, your mother, your father, particularly your parental figures, whether it's biological mom or dad or otherwise, you tend to put a lot of weight and your own self-worth gets tied into that. So when I fuck up and I get stressed, I literally pull her aside and I'm like, look, I'm sorry. I was really stressed and cranky today. That wasn't on you, so that it doesn't get pulled on her. And what that does for me, it gives me myself permission to be like, actually, I just need to be better next time. I need to not get to the point where the cup is overflowed and I'm stressed and overwhelmed. And now I'm taking it out on the people who actually matter most to me. And sometimes making and getting to the point where you're able to apply practically these things that are going to move your life forward in a positive way, whether it's learning to meditate or whatever it is, you need to have your big blocks or bricks in place first. Your nutrition, your sleep, your movement. It's so boring, but it's true because everything, all the personal development stuff builds off that.
You're filling up that bottle again. Like
Yeah.
you're giving yourself the best chance possible for this thing to work.
Yeah.
And usually it's interesting. Usually we reach for these things because we're not in a good place and we're trying to implement something that's quite difficult to do from a place we don't have the resources for it, which ends up in frustration and fuck. And that's why we do read all the books, because there is a silver bullet out here somewhere. It's fucking because I've done all the other things and it hasn't worked for me. We just haven't done it for either a long enough period or to a high enough level or the right way or in an environment that suits us. There's lots of moving parts to this. But yeah, that's definitely what I found. Distill all the conversations down, distill the 12 years in medicine, not in medicine, wasn't a doctorate, but in that environment, distill all my personal experience down to the same things. When I performed well and when I didn't shout at my kids, it was all down to how I prepared, how I prepared my body and my mind for that particular moment. And I like what you said there about not necessarily berating yourself for the action. You raised your voice with your child, but having a little look at why you got to that point where you took the action. So it's not about guilt of, I'm a terrible father now because, and I was shown this as well, by Kataman started the Buddhist. It's not about that action. It's about how you got to that action. And in my experience, and I will say this on microphone, 99% of the times I've had an issue with my partner or my kids, it's been a me issue. It's been a me issue. It's a me thing.
Yeah, nearly always is. That's the thing. Like it's extreme ownership, which can actually sometimes be too extreme. I've historically taken too much on board, and sometimes it's not you. Sometimes people are just dickheads, and you just have to acknowledge that actually that person was just being a bit of a dickhead today.
Probably not your 3-year-old kid.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely not. It's definitely not. Like it's generally not your kids particularly, because like they adore kids. Like generally will adore their mum or dad regardless of how they show up. It's just the way we're hardwired, evolutionary for the most part. But it was really interesting what you said there too. It's a work in progress. Like when I had Jay Alderton on the podcast, and he reminded me, as I mentioned, I have a fucking section in a book on how to say no. And I was just very stressed and overwhelmed towards the back end of December coming into January because I'd said yes to way too many things. And just Jay reminding me on the podcast, I was like, all right, I actually need to turn over that card and say no now to a few things and just clear. Like I've been a long-term subscriber to, when you stop chasing the wrong things, you give the right things an opportunity to catch up. Like, and sometimes you don't know when you say yes to things, whether it's the right things. So you just say no to everything, and then something that is supposed to come your way comes your way. And sometimes you just need a reminder. So for those who, like myself, you tend to be our own biggest enemy is type A's, it's still a work in progress. I still have to have a reminder. I've written the books, I do the courses, I do the talks, I literally corporate speak on this. And then there's times when I forget it. So just don't beat yourself up over it. Sometimes you just need that reminder and then the execution around it.
I like the no thing. I wanted to jump on that earlier as well. Let me use myself as an example. That was the best way to approach these kind of conversations. Saying no is an issue for me and has been an issue for me. It's something I'm very aware of now, and I've done a good bit of work on it. But I have a lot of people-pleasing tendencies, which is why I wasn't able to say no. In business was a big issue for me. At the start of this, huge issue for me. Ended up sabotaging the business because I couldn't say no and I wanted to please everybody, and that just doesn't work out. And business is a great teacher for that kind of thing. Very quickly, your bank balance will tell you the business will be like, not working anymore, done. And I go, okay, it's because I'm doing all of this and I'm not actually managing the checks and balances in my own head and in the business. But again, that idea of saying no, I heard, who was it speaking recently? Naval has a piece on this as well, but there's a couple of people who take this to the extremes. And I view this as like a 75 hard type of thing. That is not a sustainable plan for health and fitness. It's not even a good idea for most people, but it can be a hard reset. It can be a fire break for someone who's like, I need 75 days here to just fucking rewire something. It is not a long-term health plan, and it gets a bad rap because people are like, that's a terrible idea for your health. It's not supposed to be healthy. It's supposed to be for a certain type of person, it's a certain type of thing at a certain type of time. I did it once and I found it very useful for that. It wasn't healthy. It didn't particularly change certain areas of my life, but it was a great way of like, right, just clear the slate. Lovely. I'm going to start from here.
And can build confidence.
And can build great confidence. You can learn a lot of lessons from doing something like that, just like you can from running Marathon De Sable and stuff like this. Not great ideas in the long term.
No, fuck no.
But Jesus, as just pepper those things into your life as like, oh, fuck yeah, just get me back on track here. I've been distracted, whatever. And the saying no thing, some people take a really extreme approach to that. Say no to everything. Literally, your partner wants to go to the shop and you're like, no. I get the approach. Again, it's a short-term thing, but the reason I feel the saying no thing gets a bad rap is because so many of us are afraid of having a boundary for ourselves, of protecting our energy. And in my experience, when I haven't protected my energy and I haven't said no, I don't say no to everything. Oh, she wants to go to the shop, I'll go to the shop. That's absolutely
Dan hates the fucking shop.
Fucking shop.
Fucking hates Sintra.
If once I started to realize that my issue with saying no was an emotional and a me issue as well, because I wanted to please everybody, it was much easier for me to understand this. But the reason I'm making a dog's dinner out of this question and going really, really deep on it is because there is a lot of pushback around saying no, because it almost seems, especially for Irish culture, disrespectful, or there's a guilt associated with, but I'm supposed to be helping other people. I'm a good person if I do this for this person. But actually, you're a worse person in the long term, because you're drinking from that cup that you're not filling up, because you've no boundaries. So for me now, saying no compared to Dan before, which I would say yes to, you ask me anything, I will do it, because I was just terrified of rejection or not being good enough or whatever it was, validation. If I kept saying yes to all these things, people will like me. What actually ended up happening was all the things I was saying yes to were diluted versions of what they could have been.
Yeah. And
none of the stuff I actually wanted in my life, which make me a better person, my training, my relationship, none of that was getting actual attention, because I wasn't, as you put it, letting it catch up with me, because I was so busy doing all these things for all these different people without filling my cup up. So I'm a great example of that. And I've now become aware of that. That's an emotional issue for me. So I actually find it way easier now. I didn't have a specific strategy.
Whoops.
I don't know if I'm completely gone out of camera now. Anyway. I think
Sorry,
I'm fine.
I've kicked Dan's camera as I'm trying to put my legs across the table.
Shut up and ask the question. Kick the camera. As a test, what didn't help me was having a really dialed in strategy for the polite no and all these different things you can do and the ways to write it in an email. But it was really realizing that I'm saying no here so I can say a better yes to the things that I want to say yes to. Most importantly, my fiance and my children, and then my clients, my business, and then my friends, and then my football team. And then it just spirals out now and now. There's no question there. But
you've actually, I'm going to echo it back in a slightly different wording, but cement what you said for people, because we sing from a very similar hymn sheet here.
What Brian is saying is going to take what I said and make it actually understandable.
I got it. I know people 100% down, because I think I followed that all the way through. The biggest wake up for me was when I understood. I read a lot of different disciplines to try and kind of get ideas. Like Charlie Munger, who I consider like a mentor, who I love. He died, I think, last year, the year before.
Charlie Munger's business partner to
Warren Buffett.
Yeah,
phenomenal. Poor Charlie's Almanac, the original, is one I read. I've probably read it 12 or 13 times. But he always talks about, we try and figure out life and business when there's actually all the answers are in other disciplines. So read psychology, read physics, read chemistry, read biology, and then pull it back. But one of the ones that I did for saying no is an opportunity cost, which is an economics term. So an opportunity cost, for anyone familiar with it, means that if you go into the shop, the centre that Dan hates and won't go to with his wife, with €1, and you want to buy a bottle of Coke for €1 or a Snickers bar for €1, there's an opportunity cost. You're saying no to one thing so you can say yes to something else. It's all the way through in terms of economics. Life is like that. That when you're saying no to something, you're saying yes to something else, and vice versa. More so probably vice versa. You're saying yes to something, you're automatically saying no to something else. And my framework for that is nearly identical to yours. And I tell people this, and I give the advice all the time, and sometimes actually finding the answer is difficult, but the execution is actually very straightforward. Make a list of all the things that are important to you. As you mentioned, family, business, your health, then GA sport, like that order. Everything that moves the needle for that thing that's important to you forward is a yes. Everything that doesn't move the needle forward with that thing that's important to you right now is a no. It's an automatic filter. Makes it really, really easy. And then you have to deal with the self-worth, the rejection. They're different things. They're core wounds that people manifest, and it shows up in their life by their inability to not say no when people please. That's rejection. That's a rejection wound. That's a different thing. That's going deep, asking the question, well, fuck, why do I feel rejected here? What do I think is going to happen? What's the worst case scenario? Like my filter for most business decisions is, what's the upside? What's the downside? And can I handle the downside? What's the worst case scenario? And then in most cases, you can handle that as a business decision. But life is very similar. You're like, well, what's the upside of talking to that person at the bar that I'm attracted to? What's the downside? Can you handle the downside? In most cases, they might ignore you. Worst case, they tell you to fuck off and throw a drink in your face. Can you handle that downside? Yeah, it'll be a bit embarrassing, but at least you know. But the upside is you might meet your future wife or husband. You literally might meet the person that's supposed to be on the rest of your life's journey with you. So they're disproportionate. That's risk assessment 101. That's a disproportionate benefit to negative. And I run things through that filter. And I think that makes it easier to say yes and no to things, because if it's not moving a needle forward, as of now, I've been saying no to all online podcasts, because I'm like, look, I'll do in person because I like the connection. it's something that is slightly different to what I've been doing. So I've just been saying no to everything that's online podcasts, and I will for the next 2 months because I'm in a no phase. If it's not helping with the promotion of the new book come February, March, it'll also be a no. And if it's going to help with the promotion, whether it's interviews, whether it's appearances, whether it's events, I'll say yes to that because that's quite a high priority in terms of my business goal. But then there's trade-offs there. Like if it means it's pulling me away every weekend and I'm spending less time with my daughter and my loved ones, yeah, I'm going to filter that then slightly. So that's where it gets difficult and a bit more nuanced. But the first frame and the first step for that question is make a list of all the things that are important. Like there's an old adage, it's in the, I can't remember the song, Public Enemy song. It's like, when you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Like if you don't have clear yeses on what you should be saying yes to, you'll say yes to everything. So get clear on what's important to you. And then you can filter things through, will this move this important needle in my life forward? If the answer is no, then you fucking say no. You get better at saying no. You learn to say no. And no becomes a habit. It's like a muscle. They get stronger the more you execute with it. And then it becomes easier. And people tend to be quite respectful of no's. I've had people come back to me like, oh, fuck you should have done X, Y, or Z. But I think I probably count in one hand when that's happened. And I'm the king of no. I say no to loads of things. Like, and people are like, oh, cool, appreciate that, thanks. But then when I say yes, I try and it's a better yes. It's an all-in yes. It's not a begrudging yes. It's a, I'm glad I'm doing this yes. And that compounds, everything we do in life compounds either negatively or positively. That will compound positively over time.
Just so many bits in that. I'll start at the end, what you just said there. You can develop a huge amount of resentment within you, and which you never express. And I laugh sometimes, with Jill, and I had this conversation, probably 5 or 6 women. I don't know, I don't think it's exclusively a female thing, but I just happened to have this conversation with a bunch of different females over the last maybe month about, Jill would say something to me like, God, this fucking thing happened here. And I was like, oh, and I really gave her what for. And I was like, you gave her what for up here? What did you actually say? And she's like, oh, that was lovely, thank you. But she carried that resentment home in her. And that really highlights to me times when I do that. I've done it in business. I've had clients in the past, not anymore now, so anybody listening, you're not one of them, but I've had clients in the past, I resent the client because I said yes to a fit. It wasn't a good fit for me and for them, and I said yes because of maybe it was money, or maybe it was whatever, or maybe it was just my compulsion to say yes, and it develops that resent within you that the world is not aware of. You're not sharing this resent with the other person, and yeah, in the rare occasion have someone comes back to say fuck you, whatever, but I think that's an important note. You're poisoning your own well by not doing this. You're not protecting your own energy by not being able to develop this skill of saying no, because it is a skill. The reaction that we're going to get, that fear, is in most cases irrational, but irrational fear is fear. Fear is fear. The brain cannot really differentiate between what's rational and irrational unless you spend the time to pick it apart, which you've recommended we do that.
Real fear versus perceived fear.
Yeah, exactly. And there was a situation we had recently, and myself and Scott, one of the guys who works with me, my dad went out to do a bit of street photography. I'm not a photographer, but I shoot a few photographs, wanted to go out and do this. My dad is into photography, so Scott went into Dublin City, right? My dad, man in his 60s, experienced man, super competent man. Like, my dad's my hero, really competent guy. I called him this morning. Roof tile fell off my roof, and I'd be very handy like around doing things like this. Roof tile fell off my roof, smashed the back window of my car. First thing I did, call my dad. Lives around the corner. He came straight up, high vis. We duct taped it up and stuff. He's the guy. The three of us sat there, right? And Scott explained to us how we were going to get these street photographs. We had to go up to people and say, can I take your photograph? The three of us, my dad, Scott, who's extremely experienced, and macho man Dan, it took us an hour and a half to ask the first question. Because my head was telling me, I don't even know what it was telling me, just this irrational fear. You're going to say that, they're going to laugh, everyone's going to turn around and laugh at you. You're going to die. Something terrible is going to happen to you. I asked the question. I was the first person. I went up and I just said, I'm a photography student, and don't even know what I said. And they were like, oh, okay. I took the photograph. 95% of my fear went away immediately. I was like, what the hell was I afraid of? So even just the practice of doing, and then by the end of the day, I was like, yeah, take your photograph, everyone take your photograph. So just that practice was really, really important. So what I'm getting from what you're saying there is all of those bits built in. It is something that's so important because it will poison your well. It is you that's going to deal with the resentment, and you don't want that in your life. It's holding you back from things that you could say yes to, and say yes to with more quality, and it is something you can develop. So it is going to be scary because we have this irrational mind, this fear. But as soon as you take that first step, it dissolves a lot of that fear for most people, in my experience anyway.
Yeah, it's the feel the fear and do it anyways philosophy.
That's real bravery, really.
That's real bravery, but that's the thing. I can't remember who said it. I can't remember who has the quote. It might have been Oscar Wilde. That's like, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in
the presence
of fear.
Yeah.
And with fear, something I'm a big fan of, because I had a huge misconception. We talked about resilient people earlier. My language and my belief system was that there was people who just weren't afraid of things, people who just didn't feel the fear. What I now know, and this might not be true for everybody, but it's true for Brian of 37 versus, say, Brian of 17, who didn't know this at all, was fear never goes away. You just get better at managing it. And there's a big difference between real fear and perceived fear. I speak about that in Rewriting Your Story, that perceived fear is what you mentioned there. All the worst case scenarios. What they do, they'll laugh at me, they'll tell me to fuck off. Like, everyone will turn around and point the finger. Like, that's all perceived fear. Real fear is, your car the tile hitting your car. Like, if that came over your shoulder and hit the car, that's a real fear, because there was a chance of death if that hit you in the head. That's real fear. They're two different things, but the body perceives them in a similar way. And something that I get people to consider is like your fear anchors. One of the biggest things that has helped me with, say, Marathon De Sable and the Arctic, particularly Marathon De Sable, because I was terrified before flying out to the Sahara in Morocco. Like, I would have taken any credible out. The only reason I didn't was because I'd put it everywhere on my social media. I'd been talking about it like a twat for fucking 3 months before. I was like, I can't pull out. And part of that was accountability for me. I knew if I put it out there, I couldn't pull out because I know my natural state is a bit of a bottler. Like, I can be someone that will be like, oh no, I'm not doing that, and I'll just pull out last minute. That can happen. That's a weakness in my character in terms of the way that I built myself up over the years. It happens. It does. And it's something that I'm mindful of. The difference between me of now and me of 10 years ago is I'm mindful of it now. I know that's a thing. So sometimes I need to put the accountability out there. So that I'm like, okay, actually I've told everyone I'm going to do this. I need to go and do it. And that fear anchor for me, because I still feel the fear when, you're doing a big podcast, or you're about to speak in an event in front of a lot of people, or you're doing a race, you'll still feel the fear. You just get better at managing it. And I bring people and say, look, everyone has fear anchors in their life. You might not run through the Sahara. You might not run a marathon. You might not win a championship game. You might not have done something that's felt extremely fearful in the traditional sense of, say, a fitness example. But you did once upon a time kiss a guy or a girl for the first time. Or you did step behind a car or the seat of a car when you were terrified that this big vehicle could, smash into you and a load of different people and kill you instantly. But you did it. And I always use the story I tell in Writing Your Story is my first kiss. I love this story because it's everyone has experienced it. And I remember my first kiss. I was 11. I was down in Kerry on a holiday, a family holiday. I met a girl, and again, I'm not sure what it was like in Dublin. I think you used to say meeting, but it was shifting.
Meeting.
Yeah, it was meeting.
Did you meet me, mate?
Well, you meet my mate. Yeah, and that's basically what happened. So there was this girl that I fancied, and she fancied me, and we had our two friends come together and were like, will you see my friend? Will you shift my friend? And I was like, yeah, 100%.
Guys had little agents.
That was literally, it made life so much easier. I was like, can you imagine that in Coppers now? It'd be so much easier. Like, instead of this fucking...
You can VA it now.
Yeah, 100%.
VA to manage your Tinder profile and fucking set up the dates.
There we go. But if life goes in a different direction, I get my assistant on that. But with that, like, I remember that time. I remember because I was terrified. I was terrified because it was the biggest deal ever. Like, to tongue kiss somebody, French kiss somebody, like, it was the biggest thing ever. And what was fucking worse was it wasn't even her first time. So she had done it before. So I remember sitting in a bedroom in the Glen Eagle Hotel in Kerry. I don't even know if it's still open.
It's still open.
It's still open, yeah. So shout out to the Glen Eagle. Just in a hotel room on the two beds. I was on one, she was on the other, and I did what, every confident 11-year-old guy does.
In a hotel room at 11?
I know, it sounds way dodgier. And it's in the book, and it sounds really dodgy as well.
Different down the country.
Yeah, 100%. We don't fuck around in the West or the South. But yeah, it sounds way dodgier in person. I assure you, I was 11, and it was literally nothing else, except we were in her bedroom that was in her parents' for the hotel. She was on one bed, I was on the other. I was literally going, oh my God, please just make the move. Like, fucking, and she did. And that's what wasn't interesting, though, to me. I remember after, and I remember this feeling, probably from a psychedelic trip, I'm sure it came up, but I remember this feeling, and it's been very potent for me in the last while, was what happened after that I was like, what was the big deal? I was like, okay, it's done now. What was the big deal with that? And I started to draw these connections that most things we're afraid of are like that. We build it up like the biggest deal in our head. And then it just becomes your new normal. Like, you've got your fiance, I've got my girlfriend, we kiss them every day we see them. You don't even take any notice of it now. It's just a normal thing. Most fear is like that. The only difference is our reference point is different. So I rocked up and did the High Rocks in Dublin in November. I did no training for it. I climbed Kilimanjaro 2 weeks before in Africa and rocked up to the high rocks. And people were like, oh my God, what was it like? What was the training like? Oh, I didn't train for it. I was like, I was climbing Kilimanjaro. But my reference point was marathons and ultramarathons. I was like, I've done the high rocks in an hour 15 or so. Like, it's done within an hour 15. That's not a thing for me. That's not, like, it's a different reference point. And the same as I could run a marathon tomorrow because my reference point is 100-mile ultramarathon. That's the furthest I've gone in one go. So 26.2 miles just doesn't feel as long to me. So reference points change, and fear reference points change. And sometimes you have to feel the fear and do it anyway, and put yourself in positions where you're feeling afraid and moving through it, and then using those as anchor points to the next thing. And I feel like sometimes people forget that you're not going to wave a magic wand and wake up and just not be scared of something in future. That doesn't happen from my experience, but you get better at managing it. You have these different reference points of times in the past when you were afraid, and you push through it anyways, and then that becomes your new norm.
I like that. And I think it bears mentioning as well that fear is a natural form of self-preservation. So we're dealing with our biology here. So I think to frame your fear, and the fear that I feel and the fear that you feel, as something that is normal, but doesn't have to be just accepted and tolerated. This is part of our biology. It doesn't make you a scaredy cat or a pussy or a wimp or anything like that. It means you're normal. You're having a reaction, a human reaction to a new situation, which could be a life or death situation, or could be kissing a girl at 11. But your brain is like, this could be a life or death situation. We haven't done it before. She might have daggers in her teeth. She might have a poison needle in her hair. I don't know.
Thank fuck she didn't.
Like, you know, all this shit that goes through your fucking head because you've never done it before. And then as soon as you do it, you have the reference point. I have done it before. I didn't die. Your body's like, okay, you've done this thing before. But see that fire? Oh, you've touched that before. Now that's something to be afraid of. And that then becomes a real fear. So I think that for me, that's an important point for us to remember as well. It's normal. That fear is normal.
Yeah.
And bravery is the ability that you can develop. You can become a brave person. Now, some people, and I do believe it's a lot of it, most of it is to do with nurture, their environment, and how much they're exposed at a young age to become braver people or whatever. And for many different reasons. But just because you feel fear doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. And it gives you the opportunity to, one, try and understand it, and two, overcome it. And I like that approach to it as well, because again, it's empowering for me. Like, what are the things I can do rather than just sit here going, fuck, I'm a pussy.
Yeah. Well, which isn't true.
Which is not true.
It's not true. It's a story.
Yeah.
Like, as you said there, like the mindset of feel the fear and do it anyways. Like, and again, coming back, and I know we're doing full circle when it comes to talking to guests, I started to notice that people were afraid of the big challenges and goals they set for themselves, and it never went away. They just kept moving the bar. So I didn't know their whole story and what got them there, but their reference point had completely changed to what they were afraid of. But there was a consistency, particularly with athletes, that they were always pushing the bar. They were always trying to go one up on that. And again, that's up to you whether you decide to do it. But the main thing is that fear is something that's managed. There's nothing wrong with you first. And that story is very unsupportive of, I'm a pussy, I'm afraid, what am I doing? Like, you just get better at managing. And sometimes it's exposure therapy is what they talk about in psychological terms, you know, that where, you know, if you're afraid of a snake, that you go into a room where there's a snake and he's not poisonous, and then you go closer and closer and closer. Like, that's exposure therapy. Fear is like that. Capacity is a big term they use in psychology and in therapy, that, you know, what's your capacity to withstand what's going on at the minute? How much can you do depending on how much you've slept, how you've eaten, stress in life, work, family balance, etc. And then with your capacity, you're looking at, have I enough capacity to actually handle this right now? And how much of this should I be doing? How much should I be exposing myself to? And sometimes you can go, you know, balls deep. You can go straight into the bullseye. Covered in snakes. You're like, give me all the cobras. I want all the cobras. And then other times you're like, you know, it needs to be a toy plastic snake and that's okay. That's exposure, what you're bringing yourself into, and your reference point or your capacity will depend on your circumstance. Like, that's really important. Like, if life is very good right now, I use an example of someone that's done these extreme challenges. I break my life into 4 quadrants: health, wealth, love, and fulfillment. So I regularly go back and making sure that I've got things in balance and in harmony. But when I was doing those extreme challenges, there was a time when other things, you can have anything you want in life, you just can't have everything. You'd have to sacrifice time, energy, money, focus to do this other extreme goal. And I have no problem with micro imbalance for macro balance. That's fine if you're making that decision to do that.
So shifts.
It shifts, and that's fine. And I would do it always off the back of it. So if I was training for, I always remember the 100-mile ultramarathon was a good example, because I brought my mum and my daughter with me to Vegas, and I ran it in Nevada. And the whole plan was, on the lead up to that ultra, the 100 miler, I knew I was going to be out because I was like running 100 miles, 26 and a half hours, had to sleep the next day. I was going to be gone for 2-3 days. But we had a family holiday off the back of that. But because I knew there was a little bit of a micro shift that week where I wasn't going to see them for 2-3 days. And we were in this like lovely part of Vegas. Like I wanted to show them around. But then on the back end of it, we did loads of stuff. So like Holly's a very well-traveled kid. It's a little bit trickier now, she's in school. But I was able to balance that out with the family side. So you're just looking for these kind of counterbalances and going right. I am actually, business is a great example for people listening, myself, yourself. Business there'll be times when you have to push the energy and focus into the business because you're at a growth cycle or you're about to break through a glass ceiling. But it's just, don't let that become the norm. Go back and look at, well, shit, I haven't been to the gym all week, or I've missed several football training sessions, or, I haven't had a date night with my other half in a month. And then you start to shift that into balance. Like, life isn't about doing everything at once. It's literally learning to juggle. I always think of the jugglers in the circus. Like, life is like that. It's keeping all the balls in the air, and that takes skill. And if it was easy, everyone would do it. But thankfully, same as juggling, that skill is learnable.
Yeah, and I think about it, it's not this idea of balance is not this perfect point of symmetry where everything is balanced on this one point. Balance is the ability to this one up and then 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 this one up. That's how I view balance, or I view it as not having these extreme fluctuations, but being able to observe and catch things as they feel like they might be able to run out of control without losing this one completely. For me, that's balance. So this idea of there is a perfect equilibrium, is the seesaw is sitting perfectly in the middle. No, for me, it's that relationship between the two sides, or the four sides in your case, the seesaw. And I actually like that. You mentioned that in a podcast, health, wealth, fulfillment, and
health, wealth, love, and fulfillment. Yeah,
and I wrote that down, and I've actually been reflecting on that over the last couple of weeks as well. So that's had an impact on me. But yeah, that idea of like these four quadrants. That's the balance, my ability, and it gets smoother and you get a little bit more fluent, like a fucking boxer or something like that, just moving through the quadrants. And then you decide, right, I'm going to push on this, but I'm very aware of a push here and pulling here. And what I'm going to do in 2 weeks is come back and just reestablish the equilibrium.
There's a term, I think it's to do with medicine. It's called minimum effective dose when it comes to pharmaceuticals. And I always think of that with life and the quadrants, that fitness is a good example for me. Regularly, I'll put my fitness on a minimum effective dose. Meaning that, if I'm not training for something extreme, 4 days a week, 5 days a week, 50-minute sessions works great for me. Minimum effective dose, it's where I feel good, I look good, energy levels are high. That's a minimum effective dose. And then there's times when you choose a marathon, for example, where it's not a minimum effective dose. You actually have to ramp your training up. And then you put your business on a minimum effective dose. And I will do that regularly, where I'll pause all interviews. I will take on no new clients. I've got a kind of supply and demand model and different programs at scale anyway. But during the periods when it's actually one-to-one, where I'm like, okay, I need to put that minimum effective dose. I need to drop off a couple of clients because I need the time for marathon prep, or I need the time because I'm going on a family holiday. So minimum effective dose, MED, is a nice little term to bring in there, because instead of letting the ball drop, you're just keeping it up without it juggling altogether. So minimum effective dose, again, I'm not sure if that helps, but it's something I use personally.
Yeah, it does. And it was actually a point I was going to make, but it ties in nicely with the minimum effective dose and this idea that Ross Edgley has. Well, I don't know if it's his, but this general physical preparedness. So you are in a position now where you've worked hard on all these different areas of your life, where you can comfortably transition out of that for a few weeks and come back with almost no perceivable difference, because you have the baseline there.
Yep.
You've trained that. And then just to a previous point you were mentioning there, that capacity, building that capacity, the really nice thing I found is, if you are building your capacity for tolerance or fear, whatever it is, in one avenue, it translates really nicely, particularly if you're in the physical realm. If you're building a good baseline of physical resilience, I suppose we spoke about resilience, so I can use that phrase, and you have a good level of health and strength and cardiovascular fitness, etc., that then applies to, you have a tough challenge in business. Well, I have done these hard things. I know I have a tolerance for hard things, and this is another hard thing. It's a new hard thing, so it should be terrifying, but actually I have a little bit more confidence because I have competence in one sphere, and that doesn't always, as we spoke about before, you can get really imbalanced, but it can translate nicely over if you have a good level. And similarly in relationships, in business, if you have an ability to manage conflict in relationships, that translates nicely to both. And I'm not suggesting your romantic relationship is a business interaction, but there's ideas in psychology there that translates nicely. And if you've built that capacity, it's not just a tool that you can only use for one specific job. You can actually use it across multiple different jobs.
It's really interesting, because this is something I've had to think about a lot over the last year and a half, because my thought process was nearly 100% on that, and now I'm more 95-5, because with business, with fitness, with relationships, there's a lot of crossover. consistency over intensity is one that goes right across the board. Like 75 hard, great, but like if you do nothing for the rest of the year after that, you know, you nearly go back to baseline. So there's an element of consistency over intensity. Business is the same. The podcast and growing the podcast was down to an episode comes out every single Monday. It's consistency. It's not that I was releasing 3 every week or 4 every week and then none for a month. It was every Monday. So consistency. Something that didn't help me though, which I didn't realize, and this actually happened when I had a breakup about 1.5 years ago, was the extreme ownership. That actually was a tool that made me very successful in fitness and very successful in business. I do take extreme ownership. Everything to do with fitness, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, I'm like, I'm doing this. Business was the same, and it's maybe relatively successful in business. But that doesn't work in relationships because your 100% is still only 50% in a relationship with somebody else romantically. So there is breakdown. So what I always tell people is there's black and white and there's gray. And there's a lot of kind of colors in between those. So just be mindful that sometimes, and again, I'm only speaking because there'll be one person that hears and go, fuck, like I don't need to be, I'm taking an extreme approach. I'm taking 90% of this relationship when in reality, all there is 50% and I'm giving everything and maybe that person isn't pulling. That might be a business relationship as well. That might not even be romantic, but that's something that can break down. So just be mindful that there's so much crossover. Like I think it's I always butcher his name, Musashi Musashi, the samurai. To see greatness in one is to see it in all.
The 5 rings.
Yes, the 5 rings. Yeah, Book of 5 Rings.
Fuck, the Book of 5 Rings.
Yeah,
it's either there or it's at home.
It's a great read. But the message from that is like to see greatness in one is to see greatness in all. Yeah. So like I had Robin Sharma on my podcast. It was one of my favorite episodes. So he wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, amongst other books. That was one of my favorites. One of the first personal development books I ever read. And I had him on the podcast and he said some beautiful words because like I did my research. I do my research before podcasts similar to you in terms of, so you can ask questions like the 4 that you have in front here. And
about 2 in, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. We knew that was going to happen though. But Robin had a line on there that I still have on my whiteboard in my office and it's like, just be world class. He's like, be world class. He was like, in everything you do that's important to you, just be world class. And ask yourself, what would this look like if I was being world class today? And that completely flips your approach and your mindset to things. And then again, how you do anything is how you do everything in a lot of cases. And you're taking these tools as you go along. So yeah, I just wanted to add on.
No, lovely. Does that tie in as well with Matt Fraser's line for you? What would it look like if I left to be world class? What would it look like? Yeah, 100%. Constantly. 100%. What would this look like if it was the way I wanted it to look, the best way I could do it?
100%. Yeah. And the thing is, in that there's nuance because I've been a long-term subscriber to failure being feedback. Like I had the same mindset, misconception that people had around failure, that failure is final. Failure is not final, failure is feedback. Entrepreneurship, business teaches you that very fucking quickly. So does fitness though. Like if you're going into the gym and you're not losing weight, you're not building muscle.
There's a reason.
Yeah. The failure is feedback and it's quite quick. But business is like that on steroids.
Every day.
Constantly. You're just like, failure, okay, pivot. I always tell people this because the downside of business is you see the wins. You see, you know, if it's me, the best-selling books, the podcast, the revenue from the LLC, you see the wins. What you don't see is all the fucking fuck-ups and failures.
Which is the iceberg below the surface.
Iceberg below, but the truth is like it's the seed of failure planting the tree for future success. Most of those successes came off the back of failures that I had to pivot on. And it teaches you to look at life that way. That, actually, none of this is a failure. This is all feedback on either that I'm directionally incorrect with what I'm doing or my process is off or this isn't what I really want to be doing in the first place. And that's all feedback. So when you start to change that and adopt that into your approach, it means that you can be world class, you can show up and leave it all in the field. And if you don't hit it 100% because you won't get it right all the time, you're taking that feedback to improve going forward. There'll be things I've said today that I'll be like, oh wow, that was quite profound. I hope that helps people. And there'll be things I would say, Brian, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, Jesus, why is anyone listening to you? Like, but I will listen back to the podcast because I listen back to all my shows, either the ones I do or the ones I'm on, because I'm like, okay, what's my tick? What word am I repeating? Where did I not make sense with that story? And I'm evaluating it that way and going, well, if my message and my goal is to serve people in a meaningful way, to move their lives forward in a progressive way, I need to be able to communicate my message and the stories in an effective and progressive way. And if I'm not doing that, then I can learn from that and I can improve for next time. So it's all feedback. And then you start approaching everything like that. Every fight with your spouse, every time you blow up with your kids, every time you have a business thing that fails or doesn't go the way you planned, or every time you do a video that flops or a podcast that people didn't like, it's all feedback. And that's just reframing.
And like everything we've spoken about today, it's a skill you can learn and you get better at. Because for a lot of us, we sit here and we listen to you say it and I go, fuck this guy. Yeah, all right, whatever. But you just have reps. You've got reps. And the more reps you do, the easier it gets. And then it's just fluent for you. You're able to speak so confidently on this because this is how you live your life, I'm assuming.
Smoke and mirrors.
Complete smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, I just cry in the corner most of the day.
Yeah, you're great for a quote, but not much else.
Yeah, true that. Do love that. That's my superpower.
But
that's 100%. It's ridiculous. Like, I feel like I wouldn't get super strength to be able to fly. I got the fucking ability to retain a quote, and give back a quote.
I have a similar one, but I've got the ability to butcher a quote. It's a very particular skill. I can take a quote. I can get it like 83%
paraphrase.
right.
You just say paraphrase.
Paraphrase.
Yeah, just leaning and going to paraphrase a quote now.
I'm owning the quote.
100%.
Believe me, I walk in the door and Jill just looks at me again. I was like, I did it again, didn't I? It's like, how the fuck do you do this? How do you do this? To bring us on the home stretch for this one, I have 3 more podcasts on this page here, but we'll finish on two fun ones, right?
Yeah.
2 fun ones to finish off with. If I was to ask you, Brian Keane, for the ultimate human performance stack, right? I'm not talking about just physical. I'm talking about if there was a kit that you were to sell me with all of the, let's call it low-hanging fruit that you believe are probably the most effective or important in moving my life forward. Now, just to help you with this a little bit, it can be anything from physical exercise to sleep. I know what you're probably going to say already, but I just would like to see it.
I'll add on to the 3 that I gave, yeah.
What would that stack look like? The ultimate human performance stack by Brian Keane.
Outside of the obvious ones that I've already mentioned that I don't need to go back into again, sleep, nutrition, and movement, that they're the foundation pillars. I think journaling, meditation, and supplementation are 3 that are on top of that. I'm one of the fitness coaches that is a supplement fan. Because peptides more so than growth hormone. I'm a big fan of peptides. Are something I actually started documenting more on because I dislocated my knee there about 1.5 years ago and was experienced peptides for the first time. Literally halved my recovery time from a dislocation and a torn meniscus.
Can you speak about what specific peptides?
BPC 157. Yeah, incredible. And I use TB 500 as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so I use both of those. They're the only ones I've experienced with. There's others, but I don't have enough knowledge and I don't have first-hand experience, so I can't really speak to them. But I can speak to BPC 157 and TB 500. Incredible. Like literally halved my healing time.
I don't want to interrupt you here, but just to kind of clarify around these are not necessarily available for human consumption at the moment, but there's ways of accessing them.
It depends. If you go through a clinic, you can get the human consumption, but you have to go to the US to go through the clinic.
You have to go to the US to go through, yes. Okay.
Yeah, so you can.
Yeah.
Otherwise, yes, and don't just fucking Google them online and
don't
be like,
buy them on Amazon.
Yeah,
and shoot them in your knee.
100%. Definitely don't.
Yeah.
Particularly because they're insulin syringes, injectables. Like, do not put injectable stuff that you've Googled on the internet into your body.
Maybe just don't inject yourself full stop.
Yeah. Well, like if you're going to a clinic, by all means, if you're going
unsupervised,
exactly, yeah. So unsupervised. So I'm not putting that into my stack, but just that was a good one for, again, that was a bit of a wake up for me where I was like, holy shit. I had Dr. Kevin Stone on the podcast, who worked on Kevin Durant's knee from the NBA, and that's where I first heard about peptides. And he asked a question, which was really obvious to me now, which I didn't realize then. He was like, have you not wondered why people have like halved their ACL recovery times? I was like, physio?
I trained as a physio, so I was originally trained as a physio. I saw this maybe 6 or 7 years ago, probably even longer, when I was working in the clinic. And like you, I was like, and then I heard about peptides. I was listening to like the Ben Greenfield and stuff at the time. I was like, peptides were everywhere then.
Yeah.
But I just never actually linked the two bits up together in my head.
No, and I've had Ben on the podcast. Like we've talked
about.
Ben on the podcast? I've had Ben on the podcast, and we talked about them. But just didn't even into my head. Like I literally went first physio, and then I was like, oh, S&C? Like, and he was like, well, the peptides.
Machines.
Yeah. That was it. But so it was that was eye opening to me, and I started to research them a little bit more after that. Then and then I got an injury and I tried them, and then like a lot. This is one of these things that I'm not the expert. I am a guinea pig. A focus group of 1, anecdotal experience. Do your own due diligence on it. I'm happy to give nutritional advice, sleep, training, things I'm qualified to speak in. Peptides, I'm not. So this is anecdotal, my first-hand experience. But to go back to the stack, journaling, meditation, and supplementation. So supplements are something that a lot of trainers are like, you don't need supplements. You can get everything you need from food. That's true to a point. And for the average person that is not eating very well and is eating mostly highly processed, ultra-processed foods, just switching to more nutrient-dense, nourishing foods will help you. If you're me, if you're you, Dan, training at a high level in GA, or if you're just someone that's looking to improve your performance, either, like I'm a big fan of nootropics as well. So like I use lion's mane, I use bacopa moneri. Like I'm a big fan of nootropics for concentration. But supplementation, I'm a big believer in, especially if you train at a very high level, because there's no way you can get the amount of quantity of food in and the nutrients in without it. So when I'm in an excessive training phase for something hard, I've got a Hyrox in Turin in Italy next week. Like, so I'm taking a lot of adaptogens. I've got ashwagandha, I'm taking maca, I've got my lion's mane, I've got my bacopa moneri. I'm taking those on top of my performance supplements, beta-alanine, creatine, acetyl-L-carnitine, AAKG, things that I'm a fan of, caffeine, etc. So I'm a fan of supplementation. The problem is it's not a one size fits all. It's a puzzle piece fitting what you need based on your goals or what you're missing in your nutrition. Meditation it took me 5 or 6 years to learn how to meditate. That was one of the hardest things I ever had to learn. I did a great podcast. I did a great podcast. It was a great podcast. The guest was a great guest. Kelly Smith came on and talked about how to meditate for people who don't know how to meditate. And that was it was the easiest show I ever did, because I just basically asked questions for me of 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So that was really useful. I've now learned to meditate and just kind of sit with it and just realize that the thoughts are like clouds in the sky that will pass, and you don't attach any of the thoughts and you just let them run through. That's been huge for me, because it puts a pause and a break between stimulus and reaction. Something will happen and you'll have your automatic emotional reaction to it. But meditating just gives you that little bit of a break in between.
And you observe the reaction.
You observe the reaction before, and then you can decide or choose. This is why it's important not be overwhelmed and excessively stressed, because you lose that break between then. But meditation extends the time between. So if Holly does something or something happens that annoys me, I'm able to pause. It happened. Like during the summer, I spoke about this on the podcast with Karen Rabin, who's he's a trauma specialist on nervous system regulation. And we were speaking about Holly in the summer, went to do a cartwheel. She's big into gymnastics, and she split and hit a light, broke the light. And she looked at me with terror in her eyes. And I was about to go into old conditioning mode, because we would have been fucking destroyed, lit up for that. And I felt it. And I felt old patterns that weren't me, that was someone else's voice playing in my head. Paused. I went over and gave her a hug. She calmed down, and I said, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "I'm okay." She's like, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I was like, "I'm okay." I was like, "Are you okay?" She's like, "I'm okay." I was like, "Oh yeah." I was like, "It's we can fix the light." I was like, "As long as you're okay." I was like, "We can buy another light." And that was meditation in practice. That was the pause in between. And that was the first night in a long time I went to bed, and I was like, fucking good job. I was happy. I was happy. I was like, I broke an old conditioning. Not only did I not create a new core wound for her, I actually showed up and showed her that when shit goes bad, you value what's important and you're in a safe place and that you're okay. And that's how I want to be as a dad. You don't always get there, but that's the ideal version for me. So meditation gave me that. It's just one example in real life of how it applied. And then the last is just journaling. Journaling is a very underrated tool. I speak about in Rewriting Your Story about just gratitude journaling, that what I learned in the research of this book is you can't feel anxious and gratitude at the same time. That it's impossible for your brain to feel both. So if you're in an anxious state, shifting into things that you're grateful for knocks you out of the high anxiety state. Yeah, so it was really, really interesting. So a gratitude journal is really useful. That's the 3 things I would layer on top of nutrition, sleep, and movement.
Beautiful. I'm going to add one tool to that as the meditator who can't meditate. Something that was introduced to me really recently, which was very, very helpful for me. An app called Triple Flame. Ever heard of this app?
No.
Basically, all it does is it randomly throughout the day, you can set times. It will just pop up these little reminders on my phone. I have one here now. I actually don't, but it'll pop up these little quotes. The real discipline is to pause. We have to learn how to pause and listen in life. But I'm training myself to just give myself these moments of space, even in the madness. So when it's chaos, to be able to go, okay, pause for a sec. And 3 minutes or 5 minutes, a little bit of music, and you don't even have to meditate. You just sit with it and just reflect. And now I have 3 or 4 hours a day where I was struggling to get a minute of meditation. So it's helped me to just build the patterns and the skill of meditating. And now I'm finding I can sit down in the morning, I can do 10 minutes of just letting the clouds pass. I know all the techniques. I struggle with the implementation. And this, just as a little add-on for anyone who might be struggling like me, Triple Flame app. It's just those little pauses and breaks in the day, and you could just train yourself to go, okay, all this is going on. I couldn't possibly meditate too much. No.
There's a line that I love, that you need 15 minutes a day to meditate, and if you can't afford 15 minutes, you need an hour.
Yeah.
It's so true.
It's so true. Yeah. My very last question, and we'll wrap up then, is you have 7 days, a 7-day program, that you can do for the rest of your life, specifically exercise, so no nutrition supplements, any of that kind of stuff. What is your 7-day split? And if it's 1 out of those 7 days you train, but for the rest of your life, you're 37 now. For the rest of your life, you can only repeat this 7-day program for the rest of your life, training wise. What are you doing? What's the training? Is it 7 days of GVT all day, every day, max volume? Is it marathons? Is it longevity?
What's the end goal? Is it out of just enjoyment or?
I don't know what your end goal is, Brian.
Okay.
What is your end goal?
Right.
You can only do this program forever.
Love that. That's a great question. Push-pull legs hypertrophy split with a yoga session.
Let's go, bros.
And then a Metcon session mixed in with a recovery session that's based around heat and cold exposure, and then one full rest day.
It's like you've thought about this before.
100%. Like everything. You've got your hypertrophy for your muscle mass and longevity. I would add in high intensity finishers or distance runs, 3 to 5K runs at the end of those. Push-pull legs, so you're hitting all the major muscle groups across the 3 days. I would then go with the 4th day, which would be yoga and all about flexibility and keeping that suppleness. The 5th day being Metcon, so getting the heart rate up in kind of different parameters with the recovery between heat and cold, and then a full rest day.
I did not ask Brian this question before this podcast started. I knew you'd have a good answer for that one. That's a fucking banger right there. Clip that. Whoever's close to me, I'm going to clip it. Clip that. Brian Keane, thank you so much. Really enjoyed that conversation. I'm going to keep this bookmark in this book because we're going to come back to it.
Round 2. 100% round 2.
Thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much again.
Before we go, sorry, Jesus Christ, that's really rude of me. Tell people where they can find your fantastic podcast.
Please say, the Brian Keane Podcast, everywhere podcasts are found.
Okay.
And check YouTube for the videos from Prymal Studio.
And thank you so much. And you have a new book coming up?
I do. Rewriting Your Story will be out. It's supposed to be out the end of January, but it's looking like it's going to be mid-Feb now, but it'll be out in whenever this goes out, in around mid-Feb.
Perfect. Brian, thank you so much.
My pleasure.